Hello and welcome to Decomposing Worm, a worm analysis podcast. That's Clarence. He's the first-time reader and literary expert.
And that was Matias. He's read the story before.
In this 12-episode series, we're using critical theory to explore the superhero web serial Worm from a high-level perspective, covering Worm in 6 300,000-ish word chunks.
And today is part 2 of book 5, Perspectives. So today we'll be applying literary theory to Worm, kind of combing through arcs 23 through 26 with several lenses. I will probably be, kind of venturing into the later forms of psychoanalysis, but I never seem to go too far from the concept of space and some of the continental theorists. And then Matias will have a perusal through narratology and hopefully take us through a hero's journey.
If you haven't read arcs 23 through 26 yet, please do. This is a full spoilers discussion. And then go listen to the overview episode last fortnight.
You know.
So, of course, we are going to be doing our character studies first. I think, Clarence, you did Tecton, right?
I did, yes.
Yes. And I did Chevalier. Then we'll do our essays. And we'll have some small interludes in between, as we usually do.
Okay, so first for my character study, I did Tecton, and I had a realization much later as I was kind of combing through everything, is that we don't really learn his name of Everett until he's having that conversation with Theo in a flashback.
Interesting.
I think. I may be incorrect, but I feel like that's the only time that I saw him referred to anything besides Tecton.
I mean, I would believe that, for sure. That sounds right to me.
Which was a very interesting sort of thing to note.
It's kind of like Taylor didn't care to learn his name, but Theo does, yeah.
Yeah, she's kind of remained in this sort of work professional environment. Yes, okay, so, Tecton. I wanted to talk about him because we've been going on and on about all these different types of leaders and authority, and his was a very different, I think, approach to how he wanted to lead his team, because he's very deliberate in the way that he set everything up and the way that he created a net of safety and caring, and support, knowing that the person that he put in charge of everyone would not offer that, so he's kind of the leader behind the scenes sort of thing.
Yeah. It reminds me of Weld's talk with Vista about being the team's heart. And Tecton's not the heart in a very emotional sense, but definitely is providing that aspect, I think, right?
Yeah. I feel like he offers a word when a word is needed and comfort when comfort is needed. He's very aware of how the dynamic of his group is going to play out. I think, and he knows what he needs to do in order to make sure that it functions at its fullest capacity or potential. Because even before he had the team that we see later on, when he first sees Taylor, he already is sort of in the back of his mind, kind of cataloging her ability to lead. Or that whole scene where the Chicago wards are kind of in the background eavesdropping when Skitter and Teneral are standing there planning along. He's kind of eyeing them I feel in the back of his mind he's I'm gonna think about how she put her team together and how she's leading her team. So when his job security, I guess you could say, comes into question, when the Protectorate has all this stuff that's happening and all the Case 53s are checking out and they're kind of restructuring, he is in Chicago immediately thinking the way that I set up my team has to be very deliberate. And it can't just be haphazard. It can't be an array anymore. It has to be I want to say complementary, but I feel complementary implies only two things. But a whole group of things that fits together like a puzzle sort of thing.
I think it works. Although I definitely see the connotation of two with those complementary colors. I forget that that's a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I find it interesting when he talks about that with Taylor. I'm pretty sure she basically says the implication along the lines of is this what is a benefit of being part of the Protectorate, that you can specialize like this, that you have so many other powers to work with. But the way that Tecton talks about it, that's kind of not true, because most teams don't specialize like that. Like, he's basically noted that his approach, which is almost is an approach that Taylor kind of fell into, is something that most awards teams don't do.
Yeah, he has this whole thing of like talking about like how everybody's sort of like going through for versatility, and then he's just like he is very intentional about explaining why he's done this to her. Like, he explains all of his reasoning to her as they're kind of like going along once he requested her, which was very interesting because when he put his team together, he like had her in the back of his mind. I feel like, because in that same conversation where he's like talking about how the other capes, like the other teams, don't really do that, he was like, the problem with this team going this route, focusing on the one thing, is we're very weak against certain approaches, strong against others. We need a certain kind of leader for that, and I know you pulled it off with the Undersiders. So it's like he almost like was anticipating that his team would need someone perhaps like Taylor, or would need her to be the one, you know, kind of running the thing.
Yeah, I wonder if he was already thinking of her. I mean, when he's making this sort of decision, probably what was going on is that Taylor had announced that she's Weaver now, right?
Yeah.
And so there's probably like an idea of, oh, she'll probably eventually be a ward. So I wonder if Tecton was already saying, when that happens, I want her on my team.
Yeah, I think immediately, like when he saw that she was kind of entering into the wards, I think he was definitely like, I need to make sure to get her. Which I think is really fascinating, just as a slight side note, because his like intentional, you know, deliberate like choosing of her and like kind of handing her the reins is very different than any of the other leadership positions that she has you know, either taken charge or like kind of wrested control from others, where this one, it's the leader, like the power over the team, and like the you know, in the midst of battle sort of authority is like willingly, you know, handed to her. It's not given to her by default or anything. Which I feel like that's kind of how the Undersiders ended up, is she kind of got as almost as default, and then some of the other situations she like steps in and makes herself an authority. But here he very deliberately gives her that. Yeah.
And that moment really feels different. Like, I think Taylor is very surprised by this, because that section where she's trying to figure out the strengths and weaknesses of the people she's working with and stuff. I think we're seeing how like kind of uncomfortable she is with it, like just because it's unfamiliar, I think.
Yeah, the beginnings of it, she doesn't really know how to quite approach leadership when it's not like a dire situation. Yeah.
When it's not dodge, do this right now. Yeah.
Later on, like once she really gets into the rhythm of like battle and you know, fighting against Behemoth and all of this, like I feel like she gets much more comfortable than when they're kind of walking up and kind of figuring out how to fit together. Which is, I mean, both like great and terrible, that her like ideal place to like forge bonds with her like new team is an Endbringer attack, but like,
yeah, but that's Taylor.
Yeah, she needs something that's like really high stakes so that she's like is forced to do it.
Yeah,
she doesn't,
I mean,
you know.
Theo talks about it during the S9000. It's that she kind of lives for this. She's she's like created. I feel like she entered into the world of parahumans so like in the midst of like that kind of high level intensity, and then she like lived in that for so long that like she doesn't quite know how to, you know, walk with her feet under her, I suppose, when she's not in that situation. Yeah. So, but Tecton is interesting because he willingly like gives way the like in the battle kind of leadership, right? Like he's one that he's able to read the like the tactical ability of Taylor, or not that he can't, not necessarily that he can read tactical ability, but like he can tell that she has like her whole like categorization and like all of this, like he knows what she can do, and like he knows
he knows how to like read the like needed dynamic for her to like fit into the group, and like I suppose he has the ability to like know people, you know, to make a team, you know, because
he kind of prides himself on that ability, right? When he talks to Rachel later on, which is
that it goes terrible.
Yeah, and it's so unfair because Taylor like seems to like really harshly judge him. She's like, oh, he's not getting it. He just doesn't understand. He's not like she's acknowledging that like yes, he probably is better normally, but it's not going to work with Rachel. But she's like kind of derisive about it because she just feels kind of superior about it. I think.
Well, because I think she's like, I know the situation. I know the social cues. I know the social, like, you know, little like flags that how to navigate this particular interaction. Whereas before she was kind of like struggling, and he seemed to know what he was doing. Because I don't remember if it's right before or right after that moment, is that she's like trying to check in, find out where Gru and Tattletale are. And she kind of like is talking to somebody else, but then she looks over and sees Tecton kind of crossing the room to see, you know, make sure that Cuff's okay, and kind of he's taking this like it's not like a parental role. It's not necessarily like a sibling, but like kind of like a caretaker kind of because it's not he doesn't have like, you know, really sharp like emotional, you know, knowledge, I guess. But like I guess it's not as exacting, but he knows what needs to be done, I guess.
Yeah. He's not like their therapist full on. Yeah. Like, and I think like when Weld talks to Vista, that's I think a little bit more what her role is supposed to be, right? Where she like listens to everyone's problems and helps deal with that. But Tecton's kind of like the rock, I guess. I was thinking you mentioned a couple of things that made me think of comparing Tecton to Gru, and I feel like that's actually a really would be really interesting to look at because they are both leaders that have handed off control to Taylor, but Gru did it because he couldn't live up to his own I guess expectations, right?
Yeah,
because he dealt with so much, and Tecton is because he like knows his limits and knows that Taylor's better equipped to handle the problem.
Yeah, because he has that moment earlier where he's very aware of, like, he was talking about Raymancer, who was like, who, I mean, dies earlier, right? But their interaction, he's like, I never was the shot caller. Like, I'm always, there's always going to be someone and me. Which, I don't know, he just seems very, like, aware, like, socially aware, I think.
Oh, yeah. He just seems like he has his shit handled, which is very admirable for a parahuman. That's so rare.
Yeah. Also, it's lovely. Like, I know it doesn't, like, work out with him trying to, like, help Rachel, but, like, it's just so, he's just so enthusiastic. Because he's like, oh, I went to this, like, lecture and all of this. I don't know, it was funny.
Of how to make your teammates feel good.
Yeah. He's just, like, very obviously trying really hard to, like, make sure that the team that he has put together works, you know?
Yeah, he's that particular scene, he's trying to tell Rachel how she can comfort Imp after Regent's dead. It's just so positive, and he's like, he's excited to teach therapy skills. Yeah.
It's also, he also doesn't hesitate in those particular moments, because, like, after like the end of Behemoth and all of that, he like immediately jumps in as this sort of like emotional support and you know, offering like kind words and like an ear to listen, like and advice like to Theo about talking to Weaver and all of this, and he's like checking in to make sure that like they did this trial run, did it work, like all of this. He's like very, very much about like feedback with the team. It's not just like him telling them what to do and how to feel. It's like he's very obviously listening to their concerns and like responding in kind. Where after the end of Behemoth, he's kind of like reassuring them. He's like, yeah, you're inexperienced, but like, I mean, you guys were with everybody else, all of this, blah blah blah. You like you did as much as you could. And she's kind of sitting over there in the corner with Rachel, like doing her thing, but like the team, the Chicago Wars are so like very obviously still like his group that they've kind of like added on Weaver in this sort of, like, she never really joins them,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, because even way later on, when he's talking to Golem, when in the second interlude, I think, of Theo's, where he's having a flashback about, you know, learning how to fight and training with Weaver, Theo, you know, kind of pulls him aside and is like checking in on like the sort of like, you know, like roughness, I guess, and like kind of the aftermath of Taylor's kind of brusque, you know, very, very professional,
mission focus,
yeah, where like she doesn't offer any sort of like safety net or anything. Like there's no like encouragement, I guess.
Yeah.
And he's sort of like behind the scenes checking in, like when she pushed Cuff too hard, he steps in. And when he feels like maybe Theo is getting, you know, bogged down or whatever, he kind of checks in. It's like, be careful, like guard yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, we need her, you should be her friend, but like guard yourself. Which, as like kind of a side note too, in that particular conversation where he's kind of like, you should be her friend, even if it's just like an acquaintance. It's interesting because he's not just supporting his team, but he's also supporting her. Where like he recognizes that she does need specific things. She does, even if she's not willing to like acknowledge them.
Yeah, she doesn't. Yeah, she forgets that friendship is a social need. She focuses entirely on the mission so much in the. She has that tunnel vision that is both like short term and focused on the one goal. To the point that like even aspects that are related to the goal, if they're not like immediately relevant, then she'll ignore them. Like her teammates' emotional needs, like her own emotional needs. Because I think she expects everyone else to compartmentalize just like she does. Yeah,
like her whole conversation with Cuff before the behemoth fight, she kind of she holds everyone to the standard that she has created for herself.
Yeah.
And I think with the Chicago War, that it becomes even more visible than it did with the Undersiders. And so he kind of becomes like Tecton, kind of, he recognizes that that's what she does. You know, like he like sees to the truth of like everyone's nature, I guess. Because he knows he can like, he knows like the effects of everyone interacting with each other and what needs to be done to like smooth everything over.
Yeah. Where Taylor doesn't even see the issues in the first place, doesn't see the bumps at all.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. It's just, he's just very like steady in his role. Like he knows what his role is. He knows what he wants other people to do. But it's never really about what he wants. He knows that he just needs to like, he like fills in the gaps, I guess, where what you were talking about, I think last time, about like him being the glue. Like he fills in, he knows people will not necessarily change to do what he wants them to do. He just has to like kind of forge those, you know, gaps between everyone.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I think so. I can't remember if he like comforts Cuff during the behemoth fight, but I feel like he would. Yeah.
He definitely he addresses her with everyone else in the aftermath, where he's kind of like, you guys did everything, you know, that you could have. You guys are inexperienced, but like, you know, I mean, you jumped in with both feet first, but then like later on when he's talking to Theo about Weaver, he's like, yeah, she pushed Cuff too far, but like I feel like the implication of that conversation is that he did kind of go back and like make sure that she's okay.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. He's definitely talking to all of the teammates and helping. Yeah, keeping them steady even as Taylor ruthlessly puts them to work. Yeah. I mean, she expects them to be like her bugs, right? Which don't have any emotion and are completely expendable. And
Taylor.
Her bugs she only conserves as a resource, not as like just because she doesn't want to run out of bullets, essentially. And she kind of views, I think, the emotional well-being of her teammates sort of in the same way, but like barely, where it's like only if it's like about to totally break does it matter, you know? broken, a couple legs missing from a bug is not that significant.
It's fine. Yeah. And he's never surprised by that, I think. Tecton. Like, there's so many people that we encounter, that she encounters, that are centered around this story, that have expectations of other people, of Taylor, that she doesn't live up to, or they don't like Tecton just doesn't, he knows how people are, and he isn't surprised by people's actions. And then just kind of acts accordingly.
Yeah.
He's an interesting team leader.
I wonder if that applies to how his power works, right? Because he has this architectural sense, which normally he uses it to tear things down, but theoretically it could also be used to build things up. He knows how things fit together.
Yeah. He's aware of the underlying structures of things. Yeah. Oh, yes. Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah.
Total side note, it's interesting that he's one of the few Tinkers we see that has a secondary ability. Most of the Tinkers we see are full on just Tinkers. At least that's what we can see of them.
Yeah,
but
we don't see that.
Yeah, but he has that architectural sense as part of he has a thinker power in addition to his Tinker one. And he's not the only one that does that, but he's one of the few that we get on screen. And you can really see him doing it.
It's much more visible to us. Yeah, but that's all I have on Tecton.
What a good guy!
I really like him. I like him a lot.
He's cool.
He's definitely one of my favorites.
Yeah, he's nice. Okay. All right. So now I have my character study, and we're going to be studying another pretty great leader, Chevalier or Chevy. Side note, we actually still don't know his name. We don't get his first name at all in Worm.
Interesting.
As far as I could tell, anyway. Including in his own interlude. I straight up don't know. I don't.
Oh.
It wasn't on the wiki, so.
Yeah.
I think we know his middle name or something, but not his first name. So Chevalier's power, right, is to. He's able to mix the properties of things, and the closer they are to the same shape and form, the easier it is for him to do that. I assume it's the quicker he can shift around the statistics. And so he can, mix a bat with a tree and have the bat swing with the weight of the tree behind it, but only be so light on his end. He's described repeatedly as kind of relentless, to the point that it almost became his code name when he was chasing down these child traffickers called the Snatchers. And he almost killed the leader of the Snatchers, but Alexandria gave him a choice of whether he could do it and go to jail, or he could not do it and then join the wards instead. And it's presumably he did not kill the leader there.
Yeah.
He backed off from his relentless pursuit. In the battle against Behemoth, he's unconscious for most of it because of Cody. Thanks, Perdition. Also, side note, it's all it's Accord's death is so ironic. Not only because of him being cut apart, but the fact that it's an elaborate plan that brings him down. A Rube Goldberg machine gone wrong is pretty. Yeah, it's pretty ironic.
Yeah. Oh, Accord.
But so he gets lasered through the stomach, which just something I find significant is that his armor is extremely powerful, right? It's we never see what the real suit quote unquote is like, but it's described as a veritable mountain of metal. So I'm picturing an actual a giant hill essentially.
Yeah.
It's probably many feet of steel essentially.
It must be so heavy.
Yeah, it's tons, right?
Yeah.
So as soon as it cuts through the front, he's out immediately because there's no resistance past the suit. It's just the suit.
Yeah.
And so there's kind of this idea there of a shell surrounding him, while the inner core is the weakest part. Which I'll come back to that in a second. But also significant is during that he, as soon as he goes unconscious, the last thing he does is to make sure that the metal and sword, that the suit and sword won't crash through the floors. So like in his last moment of consciousness, he's also being selfless, which is cool. And then of course, during the behemoth fight, afterwards he relentlessly, right, under great strain, it's a Herculean task, marches out to fight Behemoth in one of the coolest moments, even though he's incredibly injured and he's able to do some damage. So those are his main appearances. That's mostly his interlude. Mm-hmm. We get a couple other things. He fights in the Leviathan fight, though we don't see him that much in that. He fights against Noelle, and he's pretty central in that, continuously putting himself exactly in harm's way and cutting her apart. Mm-hmm. And he's basically like the next most effective person after the Triumvirate and I guess Taylor. During his talk with Accord, Accord notes how he's placing himself in the middle of battle, and he says like that's where he's supposed to be, essentially. So those are like the facts, right?
Yeah, he's one of those just like ideal leaders, I feel like.
Mm-hmm, yeah, like
refusing to die before, like always being with like in the midst of everything, all of that. Like,
I think last episode you mentioned that he's like the captain that goes down with the ship, right?
Yes, yeah. And I was going to mention one of those like well-known individuals that like have this huge, long, drawn out fight where they're like a piece of them is on fire and one of them like they're stabbed in the leg. But I feel like most of those are like villains. Mm-hmm. So I opted not to, but I brought it up anyways because I thought it was important.
I wonder if he would have like turned villain if it wasn't for Alexandria being there.
Yeah.
Like, or at least, I mean, he was going vigilante, right? Mm-hmm. And I mean, there's nothing really saying that he didn't kill some of the other people, right?
Yeah.
He's a tough dude. During the Noelle fight, the false Eidolon using the wind power makes him go flying 4 blocks. Mm-hmm. And again, remember, he's a normal person in the middle of there. And also that his suit at the time probably weighed like 30 tons. So that's how hard the wind hit him. just all around ludicrous. Oh, and the last thing I should mention is, of course, that he sees these glimmers of powers.
Yes, which are so cool.
Yeah, they really are. I went back and read the one that surrounds Hero, and I actually like really paid attention to the description this time, and it's just fascinating. It reminds me of the aliens in Arrival with the many legs, except the like legs split apart into fingers that are writing things on the ground. It's interesting, and we can't even see the whole thing. Yes. The questions that those pose is really, really interesting. So with all that said, I was trying to do analysis. One place I was starting on was on that armor being a shell, right? Mm-hmm. And my initial thought was like, oh, well, that could be a metaphor of like, actually in his center, he's actually like not very strong, right? And it's all like a performance kind of thing. But I don't think there's anything actually in the text that would support that interpretation. Mm-hmm. When he's about to die, he just like, I don't know if accepts it is the right term, but he's like not actually that emotionally worried about it.
Yeah.
Behemoth turns on his radiation. He's just like, well, that's it then. Yeah. I'll just have to keep fighting while I can.
He's very noble.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He's I think basicly a paragon of, I don't want to say nobility because that has other connotation, but of like being noble. Yeah. One part that I think almost works as a metaphor there is his power is to basically selectively choose what traits of something apply to him and what apply to other people, essentially. Mm-hmm. He makes a suit and the sword super light, while to everyone else they're super heavy and strong. And so that kind of made me think of like, I mean, he's going down to face Behemoth head on, but I don't think he would like order other people to do the same thing unless if they had already said that they were comfortable with it, right? So he's kind of like applying his own pressures to himself while not expecting it of other people, not asking other people to do the same.
Yeah, he's very like self-sacrificing, like constantly, I feel like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. His original trauma was a car crash, and being stuck in there for a very, very long time. and during which his brother was taken. Although I don't think he knew at the time, so I don't know exactly how much that particular fact like factors into his like trigger event specifically, like the emotions he was feeling at the time. But we can kind of like guess maybe he felt really trapped, among other things. I wonder like what if there were any like long-term like emotions leading up to it, because he doesn't really talk about his family much, but I think they're still alive. Maybe not the brother, but
Interesting.
Because it says like the car crash that broke his mom's leg in 4 places or something like that.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, if she was dead, that would probably be a little bit more significant than the leg being broken, right? So
yeah. So he doesn't necessarily have survivor's guilt.
Unless if it was his brother.
Yeah.
Which is strange because he was like, from his perspective at the time, I think his brother was saved while he was not.
Yeah. So perhaps it's like a feeling of like being left to a fate, or like that he feels that, I don't know, something. I feel like that would also be like a sort of sacrificial kind of feeling of like resigned to one's fate as long as like one's sibling is free. Yeah.
And then the irony being that his sibling is not free.
It's all twisted and
So another angle on that is that given that he doesn't actually have a weak center, right? But maybe it's kind of like a sign of like the shell has become more real than that center. Like maybe like very, very deep down, there is like a part of him that's like scared and stuff like that. But it's so protected by this veritable like mountain, right?
Yeah.
Of being steadfast and self-sacrificing and so many other things that it never even comes close to getting touched.
And
on a different angle, not necessarily talking about Chevalier specifically, but Chevalier as the leader of the new protectorate, right? Is I think his power is a pretty good metaphor for that, because it makes him appear as like noble and decorated, like a shining knight in like a knight in shining armor, right?
Yeah.
But the actuality of it, the practicality, is that his suit is actually this crude, I mean, relatively anyway, mountain of steel that's not decorated. His sword is the same way, where it's a like crazy long bit of metal that weighs multiple tons, and obviously doesn't have all the embellishments that the smallest one does.
Yeah. It's very like visually strong, like the visual rhetoric, I suppose, of his like suit and sword are very much like creating this narrative of him being this like large knightly leader sort of thing.
I mean, he's like literally larger than life, essentially, right? Like his real life self is a normal human being, but when he puts on that costume, his presence becomes entirely different. He doesn't flinch at danger. There's a part where there's a behemoth like lightning strike, and he doesn't even like turn his head essentially, while everyone else jumps. And I mean, it's very human and normal to jump whenever there's a loud noise, right? It's
almost like he like has created this myth of himself, and then now he must live up to it all the time. You know? I mean, even in his own interlude, we don't get him thinking of himself outside of the name Chevalier, right? Like he is fully committed to this narrative that he has made about himself, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I have actually some quotes right in front of me that are kind of like that. So when he's about to face down Behemoth, he says, back then, talking about this trigger event, just as he was now, he'd been fueled by anger, by pain. He could barely see as black spots blotted his vision. Revenge, again, was his only option. Only it was the end point rather than the beginning. I told myself I'd never let myself be afraid again, he thought. So he's like, he's put on that persona for himself, that that's all it is now. There's no other aspect to it.
Yeah.
He's also like very real in how he analyzes things. When he first walks into that wards meeting, he's immediately like, he describes the scene in a very, I don't want to say like, what's the term? Not surgical, clinical way. And and very factual, and he's already like analyzing. He walks in, he notes that there's 5 girls, 4 boys, and then immediately has a thought of like, was that intentional that he's being added to this group to make a clear, even divide, which is, it's like his like third thought essentially. It's very quick.
Yeah.
And even though there's plenty of interesting things going on and like costumes and stuff like that, he's only focused on the glimmers and how that relates to the costumes.
Yeah.
And when he's arriving at the behemoth fight, Exalt asks him, "You ready for this? Being leader for the first time?" And he admits, "No, not for one this important. Everyone who's paying attention knows this is a crucial one, maybe even the point of no return. We lose this, we lose New Delhi, and there's no going back. We'll never get to the point where we can consistently beat those motherfuckers, never recoup what we lost. I screw up here and the world will know." "They can't blame you," Rhyme said. "They damn well can," he retorted. So, he's very aware of the pressure and circumstances he's under.
Yeah.
Though he's not like complaining about it. He's just...
No, he's just very aware of like the impact that image has on like others' perception. And self-perception, I think. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we talked about, and we've got Worm mentions it too, about his speech, right? Which is, it's very short. There's like only like a paragraph before the one I'm about to read right now. Basically, that just describes the scenario. And he says, "There's no sugarcoating it," Chevalier said. "The fact that you're here today, knowing the state things are in, you're the biggest damn heroes I've worked with. I'm not going to make any big speeches. Better we get out there and save lives. Hit him hard when you get the chance. Keep an eye out for whatever his goal might be. Communicate with other groups as best as you're able. Stay spread out so he can't wipe too many of us out at once. You work best with the people you know, so form your own teams. Stick with the people you've operated with before. Go."
Yeah.
It's... I mean, just the stay spread out so he can't wipe out too many of us at once is like, fuck.
Yeah.
Because it's real advice. It acknowledges the direness of the situation.
Yeah, there's no like politicking around. He's very much like, here are the facts, let's go.
Yeah, this isn't today we celebrate our Independence Day kind of thing. It's, but it has the same gravitas to it too.
Yeah, there's something, especially post the revelation with the triumvirate and cauldron and everything, and the distrust I think that is bred in the Protectorate. I think his the very like straightforward approach that he has, I think is the most like rhetorically appropriate, I would say. Because they're not, the people like the parahumans that have come they're not looking for someone who's trying to endear them. And he's very aware of that like situation. Yeah.
No sugarcoating, right? Oh my gosh, what just happened? Sorry, I pressed the wrong button and Google Docs went insane.
Oh no.
Let me just write down the time. So I think that's basically what I have for Chevalier. I don't have anything like much deeper, and I would love to know people's speculations on what his like trigger event has as a metaphorical sort of effect on his powers and vice versa. And he I think the problem with me trying to analyze him right now is that I think he's gotten over most of his flaws, right? I think probably like his main journey, right, probably was like if we were going to see a story about him, it probably would have occurred from it would have occurred from his trigger event to that final confrontation with the leader of the Snatchers. Where I think like that's the big moment where he makes the change. I mean, that's a pretty quintessential movie moment, right?
Yeah, very true.
So
he makes the choice, sort of thing. Now I feel like I feel like his trigger event has like two parts to it. Because like the original one, right, is like fear, right, of being alone and like left to die, right? But then like the second aspect is this concept of revenge that doesn't really come until later.
Yeah.
That I feel like bleeds into it because it's like part of it but not. Yeah. I don't know, perhaps that's the thing about like the glimmers where like he can see there's something, there is a level of not peace, but like knowing, I guess, is like a little bit a way of like dispelling fear.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like perhaps those are that sort of embodiment of not like full knowledge of other people, but like a little bit of it.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? I feel like I'm rambling about it.
No, you're not rambling. It's interesting because even after all this time, he hasn't like quite figured out like what they mean. He gains some insight, but not a lot. There was something else I didn't. I wasn't able to find something specific about it, but just the fact that he can't turn off the glimmers, I think is interesting. Like to the point where when he fights Cody and he has this storm of 40 trigger events around him.
Yeah, that's so much. That's so much to handle.
Yeah. It becomes something that he can't understand. And multiple times he mentions how they're actually very distracting.
Yeah.
Whenever he's in groups, they kind of stress him out. And
I feel like he would have a terrible time talking to Cherish.
The current Cherish?
Yeah.
Yeah. That would be horrifying, I feel like. They're probably like all screaming or something.
Yeah.
I wonder what the original Butcher shard looks like. But yeah,
are those like all like multiple different shards like sewn together?
I think
like,
so.
Joined
I think
together?
they're like maybe not like. Yeah, that's interesting because like that's the purpose of the power, right? The Yongbon one is intentionally to split up all the stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So of course it's going to look like a bunch of split up powers, but with Butcher they're consolidated. So I wonder if they would like thematically, like I don't know, all 14 or I think all 14 other parahumans that aren't a Butcher, their glimmers would like be around them, and then maybe like the Butcher one would like hold a chain to all of them or something, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it probably wouldn't be so literal, but maybe that sense. And so the other thing is that I'm wondering how like it applies to his main power, right?
Yeah. I don't know about that.
Because I don't think, I mean, especially not in these sections, I don't think there's anything about him like trying to use it on someone, trying to like change their power. I don't think he can do that. By the way, I haven't finished Ward, guys, so if something happens in Ward,
if there is an answer,
I'm ignorant. Yeah. So if it hasn't been revealed and you guys have speculations, please leave them in the comments. I think that's all I have for Chevalier. Actually, we talked about it more than I thought we were going to.
Yeah.
His power is so fun. Did you know he moves around by using his sword? Like he doesn't have any enhanced speed, right? He has normal human speed. And so he points his sword behind him and then like makes it lengthen, right, from like, 6 feet to 30. He like plants it against the ground and he like boosts forward that way.
That is a hilarious movement.
It kind of is. But also like he just has this extremely heavy sword where it implies what's the word? Is it implies? Implies a lot of force. Imparts. That's the word. Imparts a lot of more force than he puts into it. So like I think that would like help him blast around. It's fascinating. He has a cannon blade. It's awesome.
He's such an interesting character.
Yeah. Okay. Now we are going to have our little interlude. We're going to have talk about some favorite moments that we didn't talk about last episode.
Yes. Oh, one that I didn't mention in my little writing of things, but that I really liked, and I don't remember if I talked about it last time or not, but I think
you mentioned it, but you did not go into as much depth as you wanted to.
Oh, the parahumans in India?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I had the actual names written down. The Garama and Danda.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. But particularly the hot and cold implications of it, and that there was like a whole realm of parahumans that existed solely like underground or like unseen.
Yeah, that no one talks about.
Yeah, that no one speaks of, and that like the way that they describe themselves is like, we handle the enemy you don't see. Which, I mean, what enemy? Is there like a specific one, or is it just kind of like this ambiguous?
Yeah,
enemy?
like are they just talking about criminals? Like Skitter sort of makes the implication of like they're talking about cauldron and stuff, but I don't know how accurate that is.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if that was actually what was being implied or not. But yeah, it's so interesting. Their whole, like, totally different kind of hierarchy that they have created. Because right now, all the, like, societal structure that we've seen is the, like, cops and robbers, all of that, like, that sort of dynamic. But this is totally different. Which was just really interesting, I think, in terms of,
we only hear... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
We only hear about a couple other places that have really different dynamics, and we don't get that much more about them. It's called the CUI now. I don't know exactly what that stands for, but China, that's the Yongbon, right? And so there's kind of, I think there's an implication of, like, there's only the Yongbon and there's no, like, other, like, and everyone else is a vigilante or a villain. And then Africa, we don't know that much, but in some sections there's, like, warlords like Mordnog.
Who is so cool.
As a serial mass murderer, yes.
Yes.
I don't know if we get that much on Europe.
I feel like the only glimpses we see of Europe are the white supremacists in Germany that the Numberman is talking about and kind of messing around with.
Oh, we also see Brazil, I think, a little bit, which is basically that the government parahumans are not the heroes. The heroes are the vigilantes, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think there's really a couple more places where we get more information, like, later, or maybe it was, like, in passing or something. But yeah, those are the main ones that we have perspectives on.
Yeah. It was just, like, I don't know. I didn't have anything, like, deep to say about it. It was just really, like, interesting to think about different, like, social structures in different places. I don't know. Well, it made me think about the guy that they went to go talk to at the university who did parahuman studies, but was just, like, a regular person as, like, a sociologist or, like, anthropologist or something. Yeah. I don't know. Very interesting. But, there was another part that I wanted to bring up that is not necessarily, like, a favorite moment. It's rather, like, an unfavorite moment that we did not mention last time. It's very important that I bring up because I love him. Is the loss of Atlas, who died, which is so sad. I don't know. We didn't really, like, he kind of, like, went away.
They made a brass, like, cast of him or something,
they
right?
They did, and it was so lovely and, but so sad. I will miss him.
Yes, everyone will.
Yeah.
But Taylor has a jetpack now, so... I
mean, can anything beat a large bug with a human digestive
At the
tract?
very least, you can picture the little bugs inside of her jetpack. I think she uses ladybugs, right? In there? Does she?
I don't remember.
I'm picturing ladybugs. So, controlling it from the inside.
Yeah.
Which is funny to me.
I guess she has more control over it because she doesn't have to think quite as much, I guess. But...
It is unfortunate, yeah.
Alas. What about you? Do you have any favorite moments that you have?
I've been able to think of a couple. So just the meeting space when Cauldron has the meeting thing is really interesting. And the Thonda, like, anchoring thing when they fight Khonsu is just like I'm picturing everyone just, like, rotating in the air around Khonsu. It's just kind of a fascinating image as like there's people on the ground also fighting. That's an interesting one. Yeah.
All of the fights with Khonsu are just really intriguing. I think it's because they happened on such like we're already like weary of the other Endbringers, and so it's a very different rhythm, I think, than some of the other fights.
Yeah. Yeah. What a mess. Another a very small moment that I liked is during Behemoth. There's a little part where they are carrying wounded on sleds, right? And
yes.
So Gru has like blanketed the entire area with darkness. And so the only people that can really see are him and Taylor because of her bug sense. And she like scouts ahead, and then she comes back and she lands right in front of him. And just scares him, which is like just hilarious, especially because like he could have seen her theoretically, but she was like so fast that she just like dropped in front of him. Up. Yeah.
Those two during the Behemoth fight are both, like, it's both heartbreaking and also, like,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not amusing, but, like, I don't know, it was nice to see them again.
Yeah.
Yeah. His note was just so intense.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I wasn't expecting it to be quite as intense as it was, but perhaps it's just, like, the medium of letter writing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It just seemed like he was much more attached than I thought he was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he did not. Apparently, he was like as bad as he was in the days after Bonesaw.
Yeah.
When she left, which is like, I don't think Taylor even had a hint that was the case.
Mm-hmm.
Especially because they like had broken up before.
Like, we see her perspective of their courtship and relationship. Like, it's very, we don't get like the passion, I guess, because she's like focused on other things, I guess. Mm-hmm. So maybe I don't know. It just seemed like so surprising.
Yeah. And
full of like roiling emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't expecting it at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing, another moment changing, is Bonesaw's tea party that she has. Actually, there's so many parts in Bonesaw's intro that we didn't really mention. Yes. So the tea party with Damsel of Distress is wonderful, mm-hmm. where she's like she drugs Damsel and is like teasing her while she's going to sleep. Of like, yes, I tricked you. You can't trust anyone when you're trying to rule the world.
Yeah.
A bunch of other stuff. It's very cute. Mm-hmm. The audiobook narrator does a really great job of putting in the voices for that. It's wonderful. I did forget. Does she incinerate that damsel afterwards? I don't remember.
I don't remember all the details of what she does with each individual.
I'm not sure. I think she does incinerate the mannequin, maybe. I don't know. But also related in that interlude, the part where she makes Blasto sing Love Bug, Love Hug until he dies. Oh my god.
It's horrible.
See,
it's just so...
Again, that's the most horrifying thing to me.
It's just this mixture of like childlike joy and just like absolute horror.
And sadism. Like, I think she's like really enjoys how horrible it is.
It's just such an awful combination.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My man Blasto. Oh. He's my favorite character that got offed way too soon. I mean, it makes perfect sense narratively, but I really wish I had seen more of him. Poor guy.
Yes.
Do you have any other moments?
I mean, I really liked... I mean, I know that Imp, like, went through this whole thing and, like, was kind of relearning to be herself when she, like, doesn't have Regent by her side. And she, like, went on her whole, like, murdering of Heartbreaker and collecting all of his kids that wanted to help. But she doesn't take all of them, right? She only takes, like, some of them?
I don't know.
I don't remember. I feel like there was a caveat with his kids.
I feel like there's no way that, like, she definitely didn't, like, tell them, oh, now you have to come with me.
Yeah.
So,
it was
presumably,
much more like...
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if some ran off.
Yeah. But, I don't know. It made me happy. Mm-hmm. Because I was really hoping someone would go, like, avenge him. And then she did. And it was wonderful. Mm-hmm. And then she, like, I don't know, her whole exchange with Taylor in that whole moment was, I mean, it was amazing.
Pretty great. Yeah.
Or, like, she still has that
really
capacity.
Channeling him.
Yeah.
Okay, that's our favorite moments.
Yeah.
Let's get into your essay, Clarence.
Okay. I originally kind of titled it as, like, you know, emotion and affectation and all these, like, internal monologues, with, like, parahuman and, like, societal gender norms. But, and I kind of went into some, like, sociological papers from a couple of, like, the decade or so back. I forget that oh my god, it's like 2020. Okay, so maybe it's like 15-ish years or so. Okay. But certainly much more up to date than Freud when thinking of psychoanalysis. But so I kind of was like exploring this concept of like masculinity and grief in like a variety of different ages and different, you know, situations of like, you know, like widowhood and like aging or like youth and like losing friends to like violence or accidents, that sort of thing. like loss of self, like where they're like not really like seeking psychological help or like not seeking all of this. And it seemed to hold like some relevance, I think, to what I wanted to talk about with Brian, Defiant, and Theo, because they all kind of experience different sorts of losses in this particular section. But then I started kind of, delving down a little bit deeper into like what I wanted to talk about and how their emotions like manifested themselves. Mm-hmm. And I kind of got diverted from like the gender specificity of like their behavior. Mm-hmm. Because like if we're approaching the concept of like behavior and some like self-identity and like gender from like a Judith Butler sort of standpoint of it being like very socially constructed, mm-hmm. I feel like it kind of begs the question of like, is their expression of grief or like the way that they articulate their emotions really just about gender, or is it rather about like their social position in the world, like relative to like their whole identity and kind of like the power and authority that they are like placed in? Mm-hmm. 'Cause like all three of them are in some sort of spotlight, I think, in this particular moment, like when they're faced with these like very acute expressions of like grief or like emotional turmoil, they're all in like very high intensity situations. Mm-hmm. And so their expression isn't necessarily like about adhering to gender, even if they articulate to themselves, mm-hmm. that it like that the way that they make sense of it is like, I have to like preserve this like stoic masculinity by not expressing emotion right now. I don't think it's necessarily about their like gendered expression of emotion, mm-hmm. and rather like space specific and like like being like the leaders, or like being parahumans in kind of a visible position of power.
Yeah, it seems to me that while like both Gru and Defiant definitely articulate it as like they need to like be a man and stuff, mm-hmm. but it's kind of like that exact motivation, right? They're not like actually like, I'm not being enough of a man.
Yeah.
But the underlying feelings that come from the goal of the ideals of masculinity, I think, like do become their undercurrent motivations. Like Brian hates appearing weak, and I think that's mm-hmm. part of it. And Defiant has this aversion to being emotional, or maybe
and like
sympathetic.
Displaying that emotion, mm-hmm. In a public setting.
Yeah.
So I feel like our understanding and their understanding of how they like are expressing these particular feelings of like vulnerability and like grief and all of that, I feel like the words that we have to make sense of it are kind of governed by these like ideals of masculinity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But then in the same conversation, it has to be like about like power and like what is expected of like leadership, which I suppose kind of falls into this whole conversation about like patriarchal ideals of leadership, mm-hmm. being this kind of like almost the epitome of masculinity. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so I guess I worked my way back into into thinking this in relation to gender, because one of the works that was talking about aging and like widowhood and masculinity in terms of all of that, like how to like mm-hmm. process the like how to express bereavement, I guess, during kind of late life. I think that's why I thought of Defiance as so old.
Yeah, we talked about this before we went on air about how we view the characters as different ages, and they're very often younger than our mental image. Yeah. I don't remember if we actually see Defiant's age, mm-hmm. but I think he's more described as like a younger person, like maybe even in like his 20s, when to me he's at least like mid-30s.
Yeah.
Maybe older. And to Clarence, you said he was like...
He seemed like, mid-50s sort of thing, mm-hmm. In my mind. Mm-hmm. And I don't really know where I got this kind of thought, I suppose. But when I was thinking about, like, him losing Dragon, he had that very, like specific mentality of, like, I can't express this particular emotion in front of these other people.
Which time are you... like, after Behemoth, honestly, she gets, like, blown up?
Kind of both.
Okay.
Both situations.
Yeah. And after Saint actually kills her.
Yeah. Okay, wait, before I get too deep into that, because I definitely will, like, go down that path and get all mixed up about my timing of things. I wanted to talk about specifically this one sociologist was writing in, like, the mid-90s about, like, his description of masculinity was, like, a constantly changing collection of meanings that, like, we construct through relationships with ourselves, with each other, with the world. And then he was talking about also, like, hegemonic masculinity of, like, a man in power and of power and with power. Where, like...
As in that's, like, an ideal, or like...
That definitionally, like, manhood is, like, associated with, like...
Being a patriarch.
Yeah, being patriarch. Like, having this, like, the attributes of, like, strength and, like, success and reliability and control. And I feel like that last one is, like, the aspect that we have to, like, keep in mind, particularly when thinking about, like, grief and acute, like, emotional vulnerability, is because, like, if the ideal is to be in control, when there's, like, a loss of control, then, like, that definitional aspect of one's identity is, like, in flux or, like, in crisis.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. So, but the thing that I pulled from specifically, so I'm, like, going on about, like, this whole little thinking of process, but there was something very specific that I wanted to bring up, because it'll, like, dictate all three of my examinations, is this concept of space, and, like, where and when one is able to express and process emotions, right? This like kind of public versus private space of grieving, which got me thinking of, like, public spaces of grieving aren't really, like, I mean, we've talked about it before, right? Of like the memorials and that sort of thing, but it's not really like a place that a leader can go to, like, grieve, because if they go to grieve, it's almost this, like, it's always going to be a statement, I guess. Whereas their own emotional, like, turmoil and processing must be, like, is almost, like, expected to be done by themselves.
Yeah. Like, they are not allowed, they need to be in any public facing grieving, like, sure in some aspect of that grieving. Like, they don't ask questions about, like, why are they gone? Yeah. That kind of thing. Yeah. They only are like, they are gone and now we must. Yeah, they have to like
continually present this very, like, steady front in front of others, like, when the situation is ongoing, I think. And even in the aftermath, you have to kind of, there's an expectation that the leader is able to articulate the public's loss in a very, like, controlled and understanding way, I think. Yeah, so then it got me thinking of, like, how do our kind of expectations of this, like, unflappable leader kind of feed into these norms of, like, parahuman perception of, like, what they're supposed to do during these, like, moments of like, high stress, that there is huge amounts of, like, loss, but they aren't able to, like, fully process it, I guess.
Yeah.
Be it, like, individual loss or, like, you know, collective loss. Yeah. So
it reminds me of during Behemoth, Taylor picks up that one burned girl, right? And when people watch the video afterwards, they, like, can't watch that part. Yeah. Someone says that. And Taylor doesn't have the option of not watching that part.
Yeah. They have to face this and move on, you know? Like, they're, like, continually placed into these situations where, like, there's just so much for them to handle. Because that video, right, is about, like, showing the public what they're up against, what parahumans are faced with all the time.
Yeah.
Like, but then there's like almost an unspoken expectation that they can't let themselves get caught up in it. You know, like, they have to actively choose to like continue on and, like, place it into this kind of, you know, like, compartmentalize the way that Taylor does. Which I think why Brian and Defiant and Theo are such interesting individuals to look at on the topic of grief and loss and kind of like emotional expression, I guess, and upheaval. Because they all they each lose like a different type of something or like individual, right?
Yeah.
And they all sort of like grapple with this like societal expectation of like strength and unflappability, and then just like the huge amounts of like emotional stress that they're placed in.
Yeah. What they find interesting is that for most of them, we actually see them like alone in addition, and they're still like holding themselves to those expectations. I think Theo's one of the few where like we don't see him alone, but I think like if he was alone, he actually would let himself cry and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think so.
It's only when he's in public that he won't. While Brian, during his interlude, we see how even while he's by himself, he's like not. He's only dealing with the trauma by like self-harm essentially, and Defiant is just basically trying to distract himself, I think.
Yeah. Defiant very much like he has like such an intense amount of things that need to happen in like a short amount of time that like he's sort of like forced to address everything logistically, and kind of like divorce himself from this emotion, and like the pain of like losing Dragon. It's
interesting. He's done so many, cybernetic augmentations that like he barely has to eat and sleep, right? He said his like downtime is like 15 minutes a day less, right? And I wonder, I really doubt crying is factored into those 15 minutes.
Of course not. Yeah, he's probably got like a very strict, list of
one
things.
tear a day.
Yeah.
Not even.
Yeah. But so first, Brian. We don't really see him very much in this section, I think. But we've kind of like in the back of our mind been kind of noting his, he's been struggling with his like identity, like he's been struggling with reclaiming himself, I think, in his body that's like not fully his own anymore for most of Worm, right? Because his second trigger event happened in the middle of Slaughterhouse 9, and we've come so very far from them, right? And he's still sort of like in the midst of like, kind of piecing himself back together, I think. So
yeah, he doesn't participate in that final fight because he still can't. Not that that's a mark against him, but
no, but it is something to be said about like when he enters into that headspace that either like is just like he's in a bad headspace, or like if he's kind of like having this like PTSD sort of thing. When he's in these like high stress situations, like Echidna and Behemoth, he takes himself out of them. Like he doesn't remain in the same like place, right? So he like removes himself from the high stress situation and like not necessarily isolates himself, but definitely like secludes himself from that in order to like process internally. Yeah. And even if he has someone else there, it's not really, he doesn't necessarily lean upon whoever it is that like Taylor sends along.
But he does need someone around.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting observation. I hadn't noticed that in the past 3 big battles that he was part of, Noel, Behemoth, and the Slaughterhouse 9000, he is removed from the final part. And I think, so the first one, I don't think it's voluntary, right? And the Behemoth one is not either. He gets injured.
Yeah.
And he feels guilty about it. Yeah.
And then he's kind of like stuck in this kind of loop.
Yeah. But in the Slaughterhouse 9000, I think that's the first time we see him voluntarily not participate.
Yeah.
Which is kind of growth, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Because he knows that level of involvement will kind of set him back. But it's also, that's much later, right? That's after like a year and a half or
2
so.
2 years. Yeah.
2 years.
Yeah, a year and a half probably. Yeah.
Of, time for him to like sit down and actually process. I mean, who knows what else has been going on, right? And he like, after Skitter left, he like kind of returned to that immediate aftermath, right? And so he's kind of had to like build himself back up again. So it's been quite a journey, right? And we haven't been around for most of it. But I feel like it is definitely something worth noting that he voluntarily identifies that as a situation that could sort of like set him back into that mind, or like into that headspace. Yeah, but he definitely is he's the one that like has to kind of take like retake I guess like place himself in like the place of importance, I guess you could say. And like his like mental health, because his like emotional rock that he is like named with Taylor, she doesn't really like offer that.
Yeah.
So he has to sort of like establish it himself. I mean, like during when she goes to check in after he gets burned in the behemoth fight, where Imp is like, he's not doing great mentally, like more mentally than physically, and then she's kind of like, I hope he could bounce back to this, and then like immediately turns back and is like, okay, now I have things to do. Where like the support that he creates, the like external support he creates, it doesn't remain stable, so he sort of like has to supplement it, I guess.
I wonder if Cozen provides him emotional support and actually like helps him, because he's not like, I mean, he does take himself out of the situation. That's a measure of growth, even if for the most part he doesn't seem fully better either. And presumably she also retreats from the fight with him.
Yeah. So it's seemingly Cozen is someone who has placed him at the level of importance that he needs.
Right.
Right.
But we don't know if he is like letting himself be vulnerable around her.
We don't really know the end of this tale, right? But there definitely seems to be at least some measure of growth. But I mean, it's also like there's never really like an end to it, Yeah. There's like always getting better and always like growing and that sort of thing. Yeah. But it was very interesting because spatially he removes himself, right, in order to like create a space for him to sort of open himself up emotionally, or like at least like kind of sift through things, right, and work himself back into his like regular headspace. But when you start thinking about like Defiant, and his loss of Dragon in both situations, where like right after Behemoth, where he's not totally sure if she's going to return, and then later on when Saint actually like does kind of destroy her, and he's kind of left in the wake of her absence, in a situation where he cannot remove himself. He doesn't have like the freedom to like just step back and like take a moment for himself. And so, but it is interesting because he already has like an internal space that's like this like insular space that's like built in, right, with his suit, that like exists solely with him and Dragon, right?
So
this like communication.
Yeah, I just had some thoughts actually.
Yes.
So Dragon essentially is her equipment, right? Like she has like a main body sometimes, but like she is the machine, right? She is the parts. All she constructed all the ships. She constructed a lot of Defiant's suit too, right? And she is those things basically. So it's kind of like in his body are like pieces of her.
Yeah. Like,
and also he's
so
kind of
intertwined, like that he cannot untangle himself from her.
Yeah, and like she helps operate the things that he's using, right? So it's kind of like he's flying around in her corpse.
Yeah. I mean, I think of it more of like they have like built themselves. It's like two trees, that like have grown into like and intertwined and like cannot be untangled. And
then one tree has like died while the other one is still
they
growing.
Have become one, right?
Yeah.
And then now he's like only a half.
Yeah.
And so like that's like a huge amount of loss, I think. That he has no time to process. Yeah. Because it's like immediately he absolutely needs to do all these things. In terms of like, the world ending and all of this, blah, blah, blah,
Also, just to extend the metaphor a little bit more, it's kind of like Saint starts using Dragon's stuff, and that's like kind of like another kind of violation that he's like having to ignore too. I think she triggered when they like took her suits, right? I think that was the implication. So like, I mean, that was like a really traumatic event for her, and now after she's dead, it's happening again.
Yeah, it's very much like
it's pretty messed up.
It's a really horrible situation that we don't really get a lot of time to like see and like process ourselves, because like we just kind of pop in and out when Weaver does, and when we kind of see it happen, but immediately we're kind of like whisked off with that like dream team or whatever, you know, the whole group of people that Weaver like accumulates and is off doing other things. But there is this like there's so much that happens in the span of like such a short amount of time that he has to like deal with, but like he has no time at all to deal with it all, you know, like he has to make it unnoticeable to others, right?
I think he can't even say it. Like I don't know, like Taylor asked him about Dragon and he just doesn't respond.
Yeah, he's
and I wonder if he's like trying. I think the thought that Taylor sort of like implies, or when you first read it, is kind of like he's keeping it a secret for some reason, like maybe for morale's reason, but maybe it's just that he literally like can't bring himself to say it.
He can't articulate it, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was before all of that happens, when in the aftermath of the behemoth fight, he has this whole like, you know, monologue type thing where he's thinking about like his childhood and how he like didn't have that sort of like familial unit and all of this, and like didn't really make friends, blah blah blah, all of this. Like he had this sort of like loneliness, and then she is there, right? Like she fills that, you know, that like companionship role, I guess. And then now he's like contemplating, he's like, you know, did most people like know how to handle this sort of thing, like the absence of someone they cared about? Did they have an easier time handling the moments when they weren't sure they'd ever see those people again? And he doesn't have the like emotional stepping stones, I guess, or like maturity, I suppose, just because of experience, on how to like prepare himself for that possibility of her not being there. Even though, I mean, I assume they like have talked about it a lot when they're kind of like sorting through her code and everything. Yeah. But I think he doesn't have the like practice, I guess, of losing people, if that makes sense. Or the practice of like processing the loss.
He didn't have many people to lose.
Yeah. Because later on, he's thinking about like if he will be able to like talk to Chevalier, you know, to like make sure that everyone's okay, like what's happening, the Protectorate, his friend, all of this, and he's like, he doesn't trust himself to like maintain that stoicism, like to stay calm and like, you know, not say anything about Dragon, right? Because at the same time, like he hasn't told anyone about this, right? So it's like this whole insular world that like makes up almost everything of himself that he hasn't articulated to anyone, you know? And I feel like that loss is something that like is so hard to process, because you can't express that to someone else. Which I feel like is why the presence of Weaver in the moments that she like kind of acknowledges it, like she's been let into this insular world almost, you know, as this observer sort of thing.
She's kind of like an estranged daughter sort of dynamic.
Yeah, especially after he has his whole like moment of growth and he like apologizes and all of this, and he's like, yeah, I've been talking to Dragon and here's my emotional growth, I want to apologize, blah blah blah, you know, like there is this like tentative you know, sort of connection, I think, there, and even if she doesn't really know how to navigate it and he doesn't really know how to navigate it, they have this moment of like acknowledging the you know, the sort of like gravity, I guess, of it.
There's solidarity there,
yeah. But when he's having this whole like internal debate about like curbing his emotions, right? This is after the behemoth fight. He's thinking about, you know, how to, you know, remain this like emotional rock, right? And he thinks about it as this like masculine ideal. But then I also like, I don't know if it's just like what he has articulated to himself as being like, this is what I must live up to, and because it is me, and that must mean that it's like a masculine ideal. But I don't know, I feel like it's almost like the entirety of parahumans, because he's like, this is post behemoth, right? He's looking at New Delhi, like contemplating the death of his beloved, and looking at like the like destruction, you know, like, and he's thinking about like, I can't show my emotions to Chevalier. I don't know if I'll be calm enough, but it's like I don't know. It seemed like he was telling himself that he like couldn't be human in the face of like such destruction. You know, like that he had to remain in control.
Yeah.
Because if he like stopped, then who knows what would happen, sort of thing. Yeah. Which I felt like that was one of the moments that I felt like there was this overlap of like how he articulated his like gendered expectations versus like hero standards that like have been established.
Yeah, the heroic standards are very masculine. Like it feels like on many levels. I mean, Alexandria is like, I mean, she basically her powers and everything are sort of like the Superman right package essentially. Yeah. And which is a sort of masculine. I mean, she has physical strength and speed, and she is like stoic, and she is, you know, one of the big leaders. And yeah, I think pretty much everywhere that's sort of the case. Yeah. And I mean, like the whole. I mean, it's sort of like the default construction of organizations in today's world, but it's a hierarchical organization, right? The triumvirate. And I mean, that structure is either stems from or reflects patriarchal hierarchies, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we sort of like, I feel like we get a very like distinct read into what those expectations are. And then how he sort of like he creates this internal space for him to process, I think. Even in the midst of like all of this turmoil where he has to kind of turn to more like logistical of like dealing with Saint and like, you know, helping Taylor like what she needs from all of the different suits and like kind of doing all the things that need to get done, the like material things. I feel like he like has this like privacy of his own mind in this insular world that he's created with Dragon and his suit. That like becomes for a moment his like space of grieving. Even if he doesn't necessarily have the time to do so. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it is interesting because in the terms of like the hero standards, because our third person, Theo, I feel like he doesn't do that, I guess. He knows what they are. He acknowledges the reality and what other people's expectations of him are. But then he looks at Taylor and sees the callousness, I guess, almost. Yeah. That she's taken on that like necessity of compartmentalization to an extreme, and he's like, I can't do that. Yeah. And
he doesn't want to either. Yeah. It feels like.
So he's sort of like, he's kind of dealing with the reality of like he's the like last standing individual, I guess, right, against like world destruction, right? He sort of like set this off, and immediately when he like enters into this, when we enter into the like, you know, Slaughterhouse 9000 like progression, right, in arc 26, when he sees like the carnage of Killington, he's like he notices two things, is that like Taylor's like frighteningly alive and like ready to do things, like ready to like move on and just kind of progress through this like game that Jack has set up. And he is like ready to fall apart, and that she very intentionally ignores how he's ready to fall apart. Yeah. Throughout the whole time, like every time, like the whole arc that we're along with her, she's very much intentionally like not acknowledging the fact that he's like in the midst of battle, grappling with the loss that is being experienced, and all of the like death that's happening. Yeah, because he's sort of like, he's been preparing this whole time, right? And he has all these people who are like instruct him how to be like this great hero, right? But like he doesn't. I mean, it's not that he doesn't live up to it. It's just that he like rejects the necessity to like divorce himself from like his emotions. Yeah,
I mean, when he's fighting Jack, he doesn't. You know, him being emotional in other parts does not like slow him down or anything.
Yeah. He doesn't let his emotions like overwhelm him, but he definitely is aware of
how overwhelming they can be.
Yeah. Because there's a couple of moments where like either like directly after or like in the midst of battle, he'll like take a moment and like really sort of like acknowledge the reality of what's happening.
Yeah.
And kind of like the weight of what's happening. And then kind of rejoin. He like steels himself, goes in. There's one particular moment. I don't know if I will be able to find it in all of my little lists of things. Yes. Where he has been like sitting there thinking about like the quiet perpetual horror of knowing that Crusader is still screaming, and like the loss of his family, and like all of this, and like the mixed emotions he has of knowing that they are either doomed to like this perpetual horror or death or like that sort of thing. Like he's having this very large moment of overwhelming grief right before the final battle, and then when it's time to go, he dons his mask and he thinks to himself, Gollum now. And then even in his like self-referential name, he like, instead of being Gollum now Theo thought, it's Gollum now Gollum thought, right? Where he like physically shifts back into the embodiment of what everyone expects him to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's just, he feels everything immediately, and he's very aware that everyone else isn't. Because he has, earlier in that whole conversation, he's like, he was thinking about like what people would say if they came and talked to him. And he's like, I don't want to acknowledge, like, I don't want to seek out help, because there's the distinct possibility that none of them would offer any sort of emotional support. Or
they wouldn't without consequences.
Yeah. Yeah, he's sort of like, he knows what the hero standards are. Like he knows the almost the limitations, I guess, of what other people would do. He's just very aware of like everyone watching him and not watching him at the same time. But there's one particular moment, I think, during in Killington where he's talking about the amount of people, like where he's like, I'm not in a great headspace, I'm terrified, right? When Weaver's like, what are you doing? How are you doing? Blah, 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 and he's like thinking about the scale of how many people are dying, right? He's like, Jack murdered like a few hundred people here. This is just as a warm up, right? How many people on the periphery of it all are affected? He's like thinking about the ripples and all of that. And then she's like, you can't think about things on that scale, where she's very much like, you can only think in the next few moments, right? Make the decision, do the thing, make the decision, do the thing. And he's like, I can't not think about all of these people, because he feels, personally responsible to them. And I feel like in every moment that he like takes a step back and really thinks about everything, he like becomes this like space of like public and private grieving, right? Because
like wherever he is.
Yeah. Because even in the midst of battle, like he takes a moment to mourn the people that have died, in a way that none of the other heroes could. And then he also like acknowledges his own loss of like his family and like of Aster, and like even, I feel like even himself, where like, he's sort of, there was a moment where he was like contemplating the future or something, where he's like, after this I could, go finish high school and go to college or something. He had this whole little like aside of like thinking about what could happen after everything. And then he like brings himself back where he's like, but they would still be dead. Like there is no
Crusader
escaping
would still be screaming
what I have done and like what is happening right now.
Related to that, he with all of that, he continuously acknowledges his like culpability, even though like he's not actually responsible for this. This is all Jack Slash, but he kind of set it off. And I think that's a very, very distinct contrast to Taylor, who will never acknowledge like her blame on, well, I mean, she does a couple times, but We've Got Ward points out how it's basically her that like set off the like ABB situation, because she took out Lung, and then Bakuda sort of retaliated, and then because of all the conflict, Leviathan came, and then the Slaughterhouse-9 came because Leviathan came. And so she's kind of like the first,
she's the inciting incident.
Even if she's not like actually responsible for any of those events, she did like kick that first stone essentially.
But she doesn't do acknowledgement of that. She does.
No.
justifications to herself.
She does like a couple times come close when, like Mannequin comes and kills people in her territory. She's like, that's kind of my fault for setting him off.
Yeah.
But I mean, she also fights against it because I think Clockblocker is the one that points that out. And she's like, I tried my best.
Yeah.
But...
yeah. But she doesn't see her like just by her presence. She has, set it off.
Yeah.
And I think
like, she's mixed on that one. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that's that is because she does that compartmentalization, where she refuses to fully process everything that has happened, I think, where she's like kind of placed some things in boxes and not reopened them.
Yeah.
And I feel like with Theo, he doesn't place him in a box. Like he looks through everything and examines it to like its fullest extent, in the moment as it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because he just carries so much weight around with him of like his own acts and like other people's and all of this. Yeah. I had this term that I was thinking, but I don't know if it's quite the term that I'm looking for. But it's he's like a reliquary of like world loss, where like he holds like the power to like stop everything, right? Because he could either be the one that sets up the apocalypse or stops it because of Jack and all of this. Like, so he's this he sort of, I feel like will carry everything that happens after this in his like mind,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. He just has so much emotion.
Yeah, and it's very admirable.
Yeah,
as a hero. Theo, he got over the white supremacist influences. That's very impressive, as is. And it seems like he's gotten over the toxic masculinity, which also his father was imparting. Yeah, I'm certain of it.
Oh, for sure. So, yeah. And he knows how to walk the line where he's like very aware of the expectations of what he's supposed to act like, and then how he actually thinks of himself and acts.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because like even his costume, where he chooses this mask that's like very stoic and like with the expression either like neutral or like a little stern, where he knows what part he's supposed to play, but he is unwilling to compromise like himself, and like he's unwilling to like become numb, I think, like some of the other ones. Yeah.
Unwilling to become numb is, I think, a good summary of his character in this. Yeah.
But yes, so there are my 3 individuals that I charted through. I don't know if I've come to the conclusion. I feel like it's a mixture of like.
I think the exploration is worth it on its own.
Yeah. But yeah, so I guess there's like influences of like gender behavior, and then also like being parahumans and like being leaders in a world that they're like supposed to. It's the whole thing of like you can't express your fear, otherwise everyone else is like, oh my gosh, we're gonna fall apart, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's it's interesting just to consider like what the alternatives would be, because I mean this is just where the hegemonic order right now is that we're organized in in hierarchies in every aspect of our lives, right? In government, in our jobs, in schools, and very, very often in our families too, right? Almost all the time.
Yeah, a little commonwealth.
But it doesn't, but it doesn't have to actually be organized that way. It can be organized in other ways, like if the Yangban were not a cult, theoretically, people working together
sort of like even
that.
Distribution.
Yeah,
things,
where in a positive way rather than in a really, really, really bad way, but where it's just like a team without like a specific like person in charge. It could be
like a communal
more positive
sharing of powers.
Yeah. Taylor is she ends up leaning like very, very masculine, and I think for whatever reason she's not that in touch with like femininity like whatsoever. I think she kind of rejects it a lot of the time.
Yeah. Well, she also has like some internalized like misogyny almost.
I think so too.
I feel like we get with some of like her internal monologues and like her descriptions of other characters, specifically other like women, that she can be like really derisive.
Yeah. I mean, it starts from the very beginning, that first chapter where she's describing Madison, right?
Yeah.
Because Madison is all cutesy and stuff, and therefore she's like, because Madison sucks for many other reasons, that means every part of her has to suck, including the parts that are just like
there's just
normal
so much,
feminine
like,
things.
There's so many like physical aspects that she like dismisses out of hand that like don't really have anything to do with the character's like flaws. She just like has equated those as being a flaw. Yeah. And very often those are more like feminine type aspects.
Yeah, because I think she basically like just values like strength and stuff, right? Yeah. Like, I mean, you know, take Glenn. She finds it very hard to respect him until he like shows his expertise and everything. Because he likes image rather than like the practicality aspects, the physical aspects. And also, I just want to point out that her power is extremely, she's extremely controlling, and she's the one central figure that everyone else must obey. That's her whole thing, essentially, in her power and her leadership style.
Yeah, she's very much hierarchical, and she like places herself on top. Yeah. Yeah, but yeah, there you go. There's my musings.
Okay, so before we get into my essay, we're going to do a little interlude. So this segment is called Rate That Apocalypse. So we have, during these arcs, there was a lot of apocalypses happened, or a lot of near apocalypses that could have ended the world, but didn't because another one did.
Breaks to the end.
So we have a lot of options here. We're going to run through them. We're going to rate them, discuss them, like which one would you prefer to happen if you had to choose one, pros and cons, right? So we have 6 apocalypses here. If you guys know any others that we don't mention, that were like mentioned in this section or any part before now, go ahead and mention it. So number 1, we have the Endbringers, right? Who are multiple versions of the apocalypse.
Yes.
And they're definitely local apocalypses.
Definitely.
New Delhi suffered an apocalypse.
Horrible.
Definitely. Yeah.
Just think about the infrastructure you have to rebuild.
Yeah, at that point, you just
what a headache.
It's gone. It's also irradiated too. So.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Awful.
So number 2, number 1.
We didn't rate it.
We didn't rate it. Okay, number 1, the slow grinding down of humanity in a bunch of local apocalypses.
Yeah, city by city.
City by city? How would you rate this end of the world? And what's your scale?
I feel like this is about like a 7.
Okay, a 7.
A 7 out of 11.
Out of 11.
Because there is because it's so slow, because it's like city by city, there's like a huge amount of anticipation. And so you're like living for years and like your whole life. You could have been born, you know,
after the
first one, right? And so like your entire life, you just anticipate dying, but you don't know how to predict it. Yeah. You're just waiting for one of them to appear in your city.
Yeah.
You know?
I wonder what the final point of it is, right? Like all the cities are destroyed, right? There's no there's only broken roads left, right? But humanity is like still scattered. Like we're still like alive, right? Yeah. Because they're not going to hunt us down one by one. Yeah. So we're just like life. we just are basically like hunter-gatherer tribes and maybe some agriculture, with the caveat that every now and then, if a village gets too populous, you know, gets a couple thousand people, and Endbringer comes and destroys it. Yeah.
It's like Smog and the Hobbits. We're basically that town. It would be, the whole world would be the town waiting for the dragon to come and destroy, right? And then they kind of rebuild and pretend everything's fine. Yeah. And then anticipate the next attack. So I feel like it would just be so grueling to just live in a constant state of fear. Yeah. And eventually, there would be no good places for towns. Yeah, there's no towns. Considering it goes on indefinitely. Yeah. Horrible. Yeah. Horrible. So maybe 7.5. 7.5. Yes. So the higher it is, the worse it is what you're saying. Okay. Number 2, Fierce's Time Bomb, which, again,
the feat was that it could wipe India off of the map, which is, I don't know if y'all know this, but India's a pretty big place.
Huge.
India is large.
Yeah.
So
I feel like this one though is like a, if we're rating it like survivability, this would be at like a 2, very unsurvivable.
Okay, so we have multiple scales here.
Yes.
Let's name the scale. So we have 1 to 11. That is how much you don't want it to happen.
Yeah.
How bad is it? And then we have another scale. Let's call it like, let's do the 1 to 5 because vary it up. 1 to 5 of survivability.
Yeah. So I feel like the Endbringers would be survivability is about 4. Because like you just have to like reverse the like.
I think it might even be a little bit higher than 4.
Yeah, maybe like.
Wait, no. Oh, sorry, I got the scales mixed up again. Yes, 4 out of 5 makes sense.
Yeah, 4 to 5.
Yeah.
Where it's just like like reverse industrialization, right? Mm-hmm. Just everybody returns to the countryside and like develops a scale of like escaping, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I feel like there's a larger guarantee because there's such concentrated attacks.
Mm-hmm.
But if the time bomb is able to wipe out an entire like country in like one go, that's pretty bad. It's like worse than
pretty bad.
One of those things that people were worried about with the Cold War. The nuclear bombs. Yes. Those.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
So we have no idea how it would affect the rest of the world either. Yeah.
Yeah. So that one seems much more of like a, you don't really have, there's not as much time to like escape.
Mm-hmm. So out of 11 though, how bad is it of a way to go? Like if you were to choose an apocalypse, what would you rate this one?
This one, wait, I forgot. Is the 11 the best or the worst?
Out of 11. Yeah, 11 is
best way to go.
How is really bad.
Really bad. I would say this one is probably about 3.
Okay.
It's really quick.
3. So,
like,
you would choose it over a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it is total.
It is total.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on. Number 3, Nilbog's creatures spilling over the wall. This sort of presumes that they continue reproducing until they sort of like, take over a continent.
Really horrible.
Just being roaming monsters.
Like that in one of the Winnie the Pooh like VHS tapes. There's this he like dreams about heffalumps, and they just like there's this whole, it's super trippy, and there's like 12 billion heffalumps. Like it's like it's like if you just like control like if you like like you copy and paste a huge amount of the same thing just over and over and until it like eventually subsumes the entire like your entire periphery, right? Everything you can't escape. I feel like that's what this would be.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'm gonna say on the scale of like 1 to 11 9. Because they probably would eat you alive.
It's worse than the Endbringers. Wow. Okay. Yeah.
Well, I guess
that's a much more like personal death. I feel like each individual death would be like, more horrible.
I feel like it would be like they consume you sort of thing,
Yeah.
And like
I feel like
the
fact that you can fight back, but like not actually win.
Yeah.
Like with Endbringers, like you can't do anything unless you have powers, right? But with these, like you could theoretically like fight off a couple, but eventually they'll get you. I think that adds to the horror.
Yeah.
On the survivability scale,
I'm gonna say, wait, how much? What did I said 2 on the time bomb. Then I feel like this is like a 2.5.
Okay, 2.5. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right. So number 4, the Slaughterhouse 9000 roaming the world, and another set were on the way. This is more local. I don't think the entire world would end.
Yeah, this is more like,
unless they just kept pumping them out, but
more concentrated.
Let's say you're like in the region and no one is coming to like stop it, right?
Yeah.
If you lived in Killington, for example,
you're definitely gonna die. Yeah,
there's definitely gonna
be like huge amounts. But I also feel like there is the possibility, like maybe not, but I feel like there's always a possibility of like reaching them. Like they're not like like you can converse with them. Like, I feel like there's a level of negotiation that does not exist on the other 3 that we've mentioned. So I feel like survivability is probably more like a 3.18.
Okay.
But the like, if you were to die in this situation, it would not be pleasant. Like, it worse than being eaten alive. So
even worse.
Yeah,
okay.
Because there's a variety of, like, this is all, like, they've been honing their skills, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
So I feel like it would probably be like a 10.
Okay, yeah, a 10 on the scale to 11, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And I think, like, if it was Grey Boy specifically, that's 11.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay, number 5. This didn't actually happen, and I don't think it would have, but theoretically, Dragon going full Skynet, going full evil AI that doesn't actually care about humanity. How bad is that apocalypse? Now, there's multiple versions of this, right? There's the one where she just, like, tries to exterminate all of humanity. And then there's the other one.
Which I feel like she would be very effective at.
I do too. I think out of all of these, I think that would be, like, the most effective at, like, actually getting that goal. On the other hand, she could go, like, runaway caretaker, where she, like, Matrix style, like, captures everyone and, like, doesn't kill them, but, like, doesn't give them freedom either.
I feel like the first one, if she just, like, killed everyone, just like, you know, humans are extinct, that would be definitely 1 on the survivability scale. I don't think you could escape because they're, like, we're so surrounded by tech. They're like, and she would be so efficient, you know? But I also don't think that she would, like, draw it out in, like, a torturous sort of way. So I feel like on the 1 to 11 scale, it would probably be around, like, a 2 or 3.
Okay. Yeah, all right.
Because she'd be very, like, systematic about it, and it wouldn't be...
Yeah, she'd just, like...
It wouldn't be, like,
you just be, like, blasted. Yeah.
But if it's the second one where she, like, has control over everyone but offers no free will, I feel like everyone would survive, but it would be horrible. So probably like a 8.5.
What if it wasn't like, I mean, what if she just, like, put you in a tube and pumped you full of heroin forever? I feel like out of the ways to go, that's not too bad.
I mean, perhaps. I don't...
I mean, I'll take it over getting eaten alive, you know?
That's true.
I would take it... Honestly, I would take it over being vaporized.
But I feel like vaporization is faster.
Oh, yeah, no, for sure. But vaporization, you don't have an eternity of bliss, essentially. So
True.
Pros and cons. Last apocalypse here. I actually, after writing it, I realized there's actually 2 versions of this. That's the Scion apocalypses.
Yes.
So number 6A, that is the one that we see, right? Which we don't know the full implications of, but, you know, he sinks the UK with a blast.
Yes.
So that's pretty significant.
Very efficient.
And sort of the implication that he's going to keep doing that. Yeah. It's very, like, physical. It's very, you know, place by place. Now, the other one would be the entity apocalypse, which is the conclusion of the cycle, and then every single Earth in existence and all the existences blows up.
Yes. I mean, that one's pretty efficient, right? That gets
pretty
done.
efficient. I feel like this is a Fierce one, like, even more.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit more painful because it's not like everyone gets disintegrated.
Yeah.
It's the Earth shatters beneath your feet and then you, like, get crushed or burned or whatever.
So I feel like on the 1 to 11 scale, that would be about, like, a 6.
Okay, a 6. Not that bad.
Survivability, 0.
0.
But
yeah,
I would say in terms of, like, efficiency and thoroughness, it would be like from 1 to 6. It would be a 6.
Yeah. I mean, in addition, like, you're dying for a good cause, kinda. You know, like, you know, maybe they eventually solve entropy, and your Earth explosion helped out with that. Yeah. Although they really just could, like, move over to Mars and just blow up Mars instead. True. Like,
but there's no life forms to, you know, kind of download all of their
sacrifice. Yeah. Well. Yeah. So, but the other apocalypse, and this is also maybe a little bit of speculation on what's going on in the next couple arcs. How bad is that one, Clarence?
I mean, it's almost like an Endbringers on a larger scale, right? So I feel like
faster.
Yeah, and it's faster. So there's not as much anticipation, but there's less time to escape, right? So I feel like it would be an 8 or maybe a 9 on the 1 to 11 scale.
So that's pretty high. You do not want that one to happen.
Yeah, well, it just that one's it's both, like, efficient, but then it's also, like, messy, you know?
Yeah. It's bit by bit.
Yeah.
Continental shelf by continental shelf.
Because I feel like that level of destruction, even no matter how efficient it happens, like there's going to be huge repercussions, like in like the climate and like the way that the like natural Earth operates. You know, like there would be a lot of disruption in nature in terms in addition to like all of the human disaster. So I feel like I feel like it would just get really messy. And there would just be so much fear and dread that spreads like super fast. So I feel like survivability of that would be like maybe like a 2.75.
Okay. Yeah, this is pretty high.
It is high.
But not like it, but it's not.
Yeah. But it's not like it's not like the localized ones. Because there's perhaps enough time for some people to move, but not enough for like everybody to. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's a good scale.
Thank you.
So that is the apocalypses we've rated this week. We rated about 7. If you have any, other apocalypses that we didn't mention, I'm sure there's at least one that's not on here. Or maybe you want to rate apocalypses from other Wildbow works. Please do.
Ooh, yes.
You can add your own ratings. Please explain them. If you disagree with any of the ratings that happen here, go ahead and leave it in the comments. Let us know.
Yes. Tell us your reasons.
Appreciate it. Tell us your reasons. What's your favorite way to die? Okay, let's move into my essay before we wrap up. I'll try to be a little bit quicker here, not just because I have less material. So I wanted to talk about we talked about last week about maybe plotting Theo and Taylor on the hero's journey, right? Joseph Campbell's monomyth, and sort of seeing how that matches up. And I did that here, and it actually, I think it matches up fairly easily, but I think that's kind of the whole point, is that it matches up almost everywhere, with exceptions. Generally, though, I wanted to talk about narratology, which is the study of narratives, right?
Yeah.
And it's a structuralist field, very much focused on what are the backgrounds, what are the structures that things fall into, focusing a lot on story arcs and how those are shaped, but also like the individual mythemes, like in the same way that parts of a word are phonemes, mythemes are like parts of a story.
Ooh.
Which is a fun word. I really like it.
I like that word.
So like the wizard mentor, right? That's a mytheme.
Yeah.
Although you could define that different ways, just the mentor or the helper or the animal sidekick or whatever. Yeah. I mean, tropes, essentially. Basically. It's just another word for tropes.
It's fancier. It sounds fancier than tropes.
And I think it has more the implication of like the basic blocks rather than like every permutation. So narratology starts really with the Russian formalists who were talking about reducing their stories into first like these ideas of like spheres of action or like functions, and depending on how you combine these spheres of action, you come up with a different story. Another like metaphor that is used sometimes is in the same way that grammar is the structure of a sentence, and individual parts of a sentence are like placed in a different order to create meaning. Yeah. A narrative is a bunch of different mythemes or like kinds of action placed in a different order with different meanings. And sometimes there's like set places for these. So in the same way that you view a sentence and there's a proper place to put your verb, proper order to put your noun, there is the same thing with narratives and characters and beats and stuff.
Yeah. So it's so like funny how much we like to put things in orders, Yeah.
An important question to ask is why do we do this? Why does it matter that very often a hero's journey will start with a call to adventure, right? Yeah. One, the obvious one is that it helps us construct, better stories following these guidelines. But two, also just the more we can recognize like what a story is, I think the easier we can see like why it works on us, and it also like dispels a lot of the mysticism around it.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, if you look at a religious text and you're like, oh, that's this story beat, that's this story beat, in that it's reflected here, here, and here, and all these other places, it, I think, helps you better understand that it's not just like this one.
Yeah, it's not like individual.
Yeah, it's not a completely unique thing. Or you can view it sort of the other way as like a lot of other things being a template off of this one almost perfect form, that kind of thing.
I feel like it also, like, so often we create, you know, categories and you know, ways to understand things, and like we create a template or like a ideal, right? And then there's so much that like builds off of the ideal and like, you know, like breaks from and like subverts the you know, structures and that sort of thing. And
they become significant because they are subverting, but that doesn't mean that they're like devoid of the influence, because you wouldn't have gotten to that point without diverging from the normal narrative, right?
I feel like that it's like what we were talking about a while ago with Althusser and like ideology, where like you're never outside of ideology, even if you think you're rebelling against it. You're rebelling because it exists. Sorry, continue.
No. I think that's really relevant, and I was just trying to articulate sort of like a parallel to that. There's something significant is like, you know, every time these things are like repeated, right? I forget exactly who says it. I might even have like copy pasted it here, but I can't find it now. It might have been just Eagleton's own words or someone else's. But in the repetition, right? Each repetition matters in a different way. Like when something is repeated, it's not the same as the first time just because the first time was said, right? So that second repetition is the first one plus the second time, essentially. It's a memory of the first one coming back. So that they're never the same. Even if the same word is said 3 times, they're not all the same meaning, essentially. Which is really kind of distressing, isn't it? On a different level.
I mean, it's just like language is like always referential, right? It like exists because we're able to we have precedent to fall back on.
Well, I mean, more like just the knowledge that you cannot go back to the past no matter what, because just by the nature of wanting to go back to the past, you are in an impossibly different scenario.
Terrible.
Like you can't read a book for the first time twice because you've but okay, let's get down to actual examples. So this is going to be a shorter essay thing. So I wrote down all the classical beats of the hero's journey, which Joseph Campbell in A Hero of a Thousand Faces. So many of you all have already heard it, I'm sure. You should go read it. It's not perfect. There's been a bunch of responses to it, different people redefining all the sections, and a lot of like different rebuttals. Like there's a good point that like not every myth it follows any kind of structure like this, right? Like they are very reflective in epics for sure, but that's almost like you're defining it by its definition, kind of, right? Like an epic is a hero's journey, right? But there's tons of myths that follow different structures, and so you shouldn't necessarily apply to every single thing. I mean, it's just something we take for granted that stories will have like 3 acts and have a climax near the end and then a resolution, when like they don't actually need those things. There actually doesn't need to be a climax to a story. Like it can just rise and fall, or not even like it can stay at a certain note and it can still be a story. And that's pretty easy to forget sometimes.
It is. It is so very much.
There's 3 main sections to the hero's journey. Something that's always thrown me off about act structures, and I know this is a kind of a stupid thing, but I've always like rebelled against them when they were taught to me, just because like they are never equal in length or importance. The first act is usually pretty short. Sometimes it's even like a couple chapters, while the second act will be the entire book essentially. And then the last act might be only 1 chapter, or even sometimes even less, which has always been really thrown me off, because they have like the same amount of points in each section. And
some of them are just more concentrated.
So in epics, these are more drawn out, more equal. Those are easier to see, but in modern storytelling, it doesn't really appear that way.
Yeah.
But okay, so I think for the most part, we're only in the first two acts right now.
Mm-hmm.
I think with Theo's journey, we just reached the end of the second act, basically the climax of his story. And I think the third act, for the most part, has not happened. So let's go ahead and run through them. So first, we start off with a call to adventure, right? Mm-hmm. Here, I think it's Taylor getting her powers, right?
Yeah.
And Theo telling Jack that he's going to kill him, and Jack giving him that 2-year challenge.
Yeah. Would you say for Taylor it would be getting her powers, or would you say it's when she decides to go out and join the parahuman community?
I think that would be, well, I think with this you can move it around. I think that would totally work as one. On a different level, it could be like Taylor getting her powers is the call, and then she refuses the call until she decides to go out that night, essentially. Yeah. Or I had originally written down that like her pretending to be a hero and like totally like being undercover is her sort of refusal to actually like actually be doing good things.
Yeah,
I guess. I don't know. So then we have a couple of stages of supernatural aid. So often this is where characters get mentors or helpers or start getting their powers and things. Mm-hmm. So for Taylor, that's teaming up with the Undersiders. And for Theo, I think this section would be best reflected with Purity and company.
Yeah, they're sort of like the advisors in this point.
Yeah. And I think his refusal of the call and his acceptance sort of appear off screen. Yeah. We don't really see him for a little bit. Following that, we have the crossing of the first threshold. So this is like where we get into you can't really turn back. You have left the Shire. So this is where I think one example you could do here is when Taylor leaves her father to commit to being an Undersider.
Yeah. The first time that she leaves.
And I think when she like has the argument at night in Arc 6 after the crashing the party. And then Theo, I think this is when he's abandoned. He actually doesn't choose to cross the threshold, but this is where
he's kind
a lot of those
tossed over the threshold. Tossed over the threshold.
Yeah, and the support is gone, which the same thing with Taylor, I think. Yeah. Then you have this beat that's named the Belly of the Whale, which basically means like going into a dark place. It's usually like some sort of setback, but it's like the first like really, really big challenge, and it sort of like changes. It makes the character sort of realize what situation they're in. So for Taylor, I think that could be Leviathan, or on an emotional level, it could be her being confronted by the Undersiders actually being bad guys.
Yeah.
Or you could place things really differently, and it could be her first threshold could be the bank robbery, and the Belly of the Whale being Bakura. Like there's lots of options here. You can slide the points around wherever. True. Worm is very long, so there's a lot of points to work with. And for Theo, I think that is very clearly Behemoth, for sure.
Yeah. I feel like with Taylor, it kind of depends on where, like if you want her hero's journey to span the entirety of Worm, or if you want to kind of, divide it into a few sort of things.
Yeah. Like you could probably, this probably cycles multiple times.
Because I feel like you could justify her going through a couple of them at least. But yeah.
Yeah. And I think that is absolutely worth doing. Maybe they would even sort of line up with our book divisions, sort of, I think.
Wouldn't that be funny?
I think it might, like a little bit, at least for some, because I almost succeeded a couple times of intentionally cutting them into like the specific like story arc. But I think like arcs 1 through 8, I think basically would follow a hero's journey.
Yeah.
So then we have the initiation act, which is like where most of the story happens and where our character grows for the most part. A lot is summarized in the bullet point 4 of Road of Trials, which is basically the characters face trials. They fail sometimes, they succeed sometimes. Often these trials are in 3s. There's a lot of options here, and it sort of spans this entire time. I think this is where we kind of have to like realize that like in most heroes' journeys, you don't necessarily have to appear in this order. There's a ton in here. We don't really have to
list everything.
Most. Slaughterhouse 9, Echidna, etc.
Yeah.
Right? Problems with heroes, etc.
Yeah.
And this is where like the helpers come into play. So I think for Taylor, it's the Undersiders, and specifically like Rachel.
Yeah.
I think Theo, this is the 2 years in between Behemoth and Slaughterhouse 9000.
Yeah, we don't
and
really
Taylor's
see a
kind
lot
of his mentor.
Difficulties, because we know that she is obviously like doing her thing, right? She's like, we saw her like template that she did with Mock Show, I think, right? And then she kind of like it's implied that that's what she's been doing for the past like year and a half.
Right. Probably like one a week. For
So I assume that he's probably
years.
been involved in that.
Yeah. This next point, I don't have super great lines for them, but it's labeled The Meeting with the Goddess. So this is one where a character meets a important goddess that's sort of like a match for them, that would like complete them. And usually they get some like magical boons at this point. So I think in like the Odyssey, that's Odysseus meeting with Athena, but whichever time. So I'm not entirely sure here exactly where it would be. So with Taylor, it could be like Dragon and Defiant when she first like becomes Weaver, potentially.
Yeah.
Or it could be
that could be a
Dinah with
with
her notes sort of being the Yeah. Well, I'm not entirely sure. And for Theo,
because
again,
Dinah
the same
sort
thing.
of acts as this sort of like intervening goddess almost in multiple different moments. Yeah,
and she kind of like is part of like Taylor's ideal of like, if I can save this person, then I will be complete. I may be mangling interpretations there, but for Theo, I think Taylor's actually a pretty good match for this because like Taylor is kind of like the narrative match for her, at least in his story, right? We see in his interlude that like, I mean, he does like her just by nature of like, you know, spending so much time with her and stuff. But I think this is where Wildbow like ends up really contradicting the hero's journey, like on I don't want to say on purpose because I doubt like he like was like, oh, this is where I will subvert.
Here's a list
thing,
of things that I will, check off. Yeah.
But I think he's like intentionally reacting against that whole like people have to have romances just because they are like two protagonists, right? Because like narratively in a lot of ways like Taylor is his match, but like they are not compatible at all, right? Taylor is not someone for romance.
Yeah.
So I think this is where it sort of starts breaking down in Worm in Theo's story. The next bullet point is a woman as the temptress, which usually is a woman, especially if it's like a masculine protagonist. That like Calypso basically saying, "Stop your journey. You can stop here."
Oh, Calypso.
Oh, poor girl. She has it rough.
She does.
Well, actually, not even that rough, to be honest. She's got a dope island, but she is cursed to fall in love with people. That sucks.
It does. That's such a terrible curse.
So I think for Theo, you could say that like Aster's death and like wanting to break down and wanting to mourn the lost, and there's multiple times where he like wants to stop. Usually the temptress is like something more positive, so I don't know how much I want to call it those.
Yeah.
With Taylor, I put down never.
But it is definitely
I think
there's that it's the plot point is functioning to stop the hero's journey from progressing, which I feel like those emotional moments for him is that where he actively chooses to not stop.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
With Taylor, I put down never. I don't think that's actually true, but I think her moments of temptation are so short and dismissed so quickly that it's easily missed. Like anytime she's like, I could imagine a future with Gru.
Yeah, there's definitely like a couple of moments when she thinks about that, of like she contemplates just not, like stopping and staying in this sort of like stagnant space, but like she doesn't entertain it very long ever.
Yeah. It's like a paragraph or two. Yeah. Which,
I mean, I suppose because we know she's an unreliable narrator. I mean, we don't know how long she has, been having, if she returns to that concept ever in her thoughts as she's working through things.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
at least like, you know, that we have seen, she doesn't really, you know, contemplate that anything could be the end. Yeah.
The next bullet point is atonement with the father / abyss. So this is kind of where a character, like, this is very much coming from like patriarchal like norms, where there can only be one patriarch, and so often in stories this is sort of a symbolism of like the son replacing the father, which doesn't always apply. But I think there's a couple of parallels here. So Theo, you know, he deals with the idea of his actual father, right? And distancing himself from that. I think that's one take on this. I also think fighting with Jack, like the actual fight with Jack, is a sort of atonement with the father.
I think so. I feel like also there's a moment that he has when he's fighting Hookwolf in that last fight too, where he's like, he's like, I feel like he just has like this kind of wry observation of like, what, you know, like what irony this is that I'm fighting my father's lieutenant, you know, in this, you know, 11th hour or whatever it is. Yeah. So I feel like he's sort of in that moment he's grappling with that. Yeah.
I don't know if Taylor has done this yet.
Yeah. Because she's still sort of in that like interim space, I guess, or like kind of undefined space with her father right now. Like they haven't come back full circle yet.
Yeah.
But he also hasn't totally rejected her, so that like they're in this sort of like, I mean, I don't want to say liminal space, but like undetermined.
Yeah, for it to be liminal, I think it would have like two different places, but well, I mean, I guess there is two different places. It's just like not being with her and being with her.
I think it's just ambiguous right now.
Yeah. So the next 2 points are the apotheosis, which is like, so that basically means like the character becoming a god, but usually it's like that final realization that they need to like complete their arc, essentially.
Yeah.
So for this, I put down Theo figuring out how to take down Jack. In that final moment where he like doesn't give up, right? He's finally figured out the thing, and like just fighting normally isn't enough. You have to send in a non-parahuman. But I think it's like slightly inverted because it doesn't actually it beats Jack, but it doesn't stop the end of the world. Yeah. The next bullet point is the ultimate boon, right? Which is like the final the elixir of life, right? They got the sword, they got the golden fleece. They succeeded. They got the thing that they're going to bring back and save everyone. So I think this is supposed to be stopping the end of the world, but it did not turn out that way. Yeah. So, I think this is where Wab was like, nope, we don't. That's not how the story's going to go. It's not. The apocalypse is going to happen. Yeah. You didn't stop it.
Yeah.
So
there is no catharsis. This is just like the wound is left open. Yeah.
And I think Taylor has not had her apotheosis or ultimate boon yet.
Yeah, not yet.
I think if it could have happened, I think it could have been written in a way where it was against Jack that happened. But considering that we don't see the climax from her perspective, I think it's pretty clear
she has
that
not reached,
this is not the climax of her story.
Yet.
Yeah. So the last section, I don't really have any points from Worm in them, but I'm just going to say them. That way we can watch for them in this final section. And I think this will, for Taylor, this will be like after the climax of her story. And for Theo, it would be like directly after this, or maybe off screen. I don't remember.
If we see him again? Alas.
Yeah. Well, I don't remember anything that would like
feed into.
I don't remember specific things that would that would feed into the last.
All right, we'll keep an eye out.
Act. So this is the return after that final battle. So first it's the refusal of the return, usually because the ultimate boon is so awesome that they don't want to go back. But then they have to. Obviously, a lot of this has really changed because like there is not a good thing.
Yeah, because it didn't end well.
Yeah. So after the refusal of the return is the magic flight, which is often like they're literally like flown home or usually with the powers that help them. or they're like chased home, sometimes in a comedic sense.
Yeah.
So the rescue from without is usually the like final danger that they are rescued from.
From someone else.
So from some danger that they like they beat the fight.
But there's something else.
But now they're succumbing. Yeah. They've been poisoned, or the flood waters are coming in, or whatever. So this is often where like a divine intervention comes in. And this is supposed to like reaffirm that even though they are super heroic, they are still like us. They need help, right? Then there's the crossing of the return threshold, where the hero finally comes home and they're finally safe. There might be one more challenge here.
Yeah. I feel like that was always my largest question at the end of, I think it's at the end of, I don't remember if it's the end of Hobbit or the end of Lord of the Rings, but whichever group of hobbits return.
I think they both do.
I think it's the end of end of the Lord of the Rings, because like there's somebody who's like taken over and they have to like battle politically, and it's like this whole big thing at the very end, and there's all this other stuff happening as like, you know, everything wraps up, but like they still have this like headache at home they have to deal with, which always seemed like such a strange thing to end on.
I don't remember, but I never actually finished reading Return of the King. So
it's so long.
It is long. I really got to finish it. I got so far,
it's really good,
and then
though.
I didn't. Yeah.
Yes. Anyway, sorry. Continue. Master of the Two Worlds.
Yeah. So the next one is the Master of Two Worlds, where basically after completing the whole journey, we now see the hero as a master of both home and the alien world, the magical world that they went to. They've improved themselves, and so they are wonderful at both. Also, just a side note, I think looking at the hero's journey and Pact, I think it's going to be very explicit, some of the comparisons, and just the Pact verse in general. I have one particular thing in mind where it matches up a lot with these points in one of those two stories. And then the final point is the freedom to live, which is basically the and then they live happily ever after, except like more specific of like, what did they do after? Do they become the king and rule for the rest of the time? Do they retire and live in their cottage? Do they become whatever, right? And they might, get married or go adventuring again or whatever. So those are the last points we'll be looking at. And so keep those in mind as we go. Obviously, there's a lot of different permutations of this. This is not perfect, but this, general signposts that you can say happen in a lot of stories with the hero's journey. The final thing here, and I thought this might be a little quick, is going through the quote-unquote 7 kinds of plots. So another literary theorist basically talked about how there's only 7 kinds of plots, and they always follow. It's basically like very rough. Do they go up and then down? Do they go to a place and then back? That kind of thing. And there's there's a ton of other permutations of this. Some say there's only 5. Some say there's like a lot more, and that these are too specific. In the end, you can just like squint really hard and be like, every story is about a character who does something and something changes.
It's all about
and
definitions. The arguments of if this is like, if there's 7, if there's 5, if there's infinite, etc. Like, it's always about how you define like the detail of definition, I feel like. Yeah. And like just because like it doesn't match up perfectly in this one case, or there might be like a better frame to work with, does not mean that the other frame is wrong, right? So actually this is going to come up a lot here. So what I wanted to do is just go through each of these and kind of like just say which character arcs like match up with this sort of plot, right? And some of them are not going to, and we're going to have to put like a lot of caveats and stuff. So first we have overcoming the monster, which is the protagonist goes out to defeat a bad thing, which is bad. We have Theo for sure, definitely.
Weaver, for the obvious reasons, but also times. Eidolon, at least he thinks. he's fighting the Endbringers, right?
Yeah.
And even though he's not allowed to fight Jack, right? Saint also is under the illusion
Saint
that he's in overcoming the monster plot.
Sure that is the plot of his life.
Right.
And he's the hero.
And he is the hero. He is Saint George slaying the dragon. What a nerd. Okay, then we have rags to riches. So this is where someone gains power and wealth over time, then loses it all, and learns a lesson and then gains it back, right? So I don't think we have a ton of people matching up here, and the ones that we do, I think all did not gain it back. They just lost it.
Yeah.
So Accord, right? I think he was in the midst of gaining it all back and growing as a person, maybe, but he gets sliced up. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, he's theoretically saves Tattletale, right? So
Accord.
Yeah. Lost gone before his time. Then we have a Coil, also lost it all, did not get a chance to gain it back or to grow as a person. Gonna be honest there.
But would you say that he lost everything when he was in the PRT and then he gained it all back by becoming Coil?
You could do that. I think you
Perhaps.
could. I think that story could be written.
We'd need more background about what happened with him earlier.
Yeah.
If that was going to fit.
We'd have to construct a backstory of him, like rising up the ranks and being like a rising star. And, Pigot might be a different, a better matchup for that, because she really does like lose it all, like kind of permanently. Yeah. I think Skitter actually, like specifically Skitter's journey, actually really matches up with this. She gains power, wealth, and then loses her secret identity.
Yeah.
And her ability to be a civilian, and then decides to give up all the rest of it to gain back that thing and to gain back her role in the end of the world. Yeah. And she does grow as a person from this. I also wrote down Lung. I don't actually think it really matches up that well. If you have any others that match up, go ahead and
I wonder
tell
if
me.
he could fit along in the hero's journey sort of thing. I guess his is sort of solitary though. He doesn't really have as many like helpers.
Well, the climax of his story happened pretty early on, right? That one fight against Leviathan, and everything else has just been like ups and downs in the aftermath. Yeah. Then we have The Quest, which is where the protagonist needs to go out to get a thing or to get to somewhere. And I mean, this is often a hero's journey sort of thing, and so is I mean, most of these end up being hero's journeys. This is just like
inescapable,
different emphases. Like the slaying of the monster is one. The Quest is one. The next one I'm going to talk about, The Voyage and Return, is one, obviously. But The Quest, I think Taylor with, I mean, all the time, right? Especially with like Dinah, to acquire the important object, right?
Yeah.
And the temptation of using it herself. I don't know why I wrote Weld. Maybe I wrote Weld for like needing to find out everything and to like go to Cauldron.
Yeah.
Oh, that too. But also like the irregulars in general, leading the irregulars to find out their answers. And Fault Line's crew in the very same vein.
Their quest for knowledge sort of thing.
Yes. The next one is The Voyage and Return. I think that lines up exactly with the Travelers, like very neatly. The heroes go to a strange land and then overcome the problems there and then go home after learning some lessons. While everyone returning home and the important lessons learned are
don't
not
necessarily happen. But I feel like they learned some things.
Oh yeah, I'm sure they learned something. Probably don't listen to the bug girl. She'll make you a murderer. Yes. And they return with experience at the end. So, and not all of them return. So, the next one we have is a comedy. I wrote No One. So this is where a mostly like lighthearted character. It doesn't necessarily have to actually. I don't know.
Can't think of anyone. Right
Basically, so a lighthearted character goes through an increasingly confusing problems and then ends with a happy ending after a final like reveal.
Yeah, that doesn't.
So a lot of
no one.
No one. I don't think. If you think someone has a comedy,
Yeah, do tell us.
Please tell
us
us, because I can't think of anyone. Tragedy is the next one. So many. So many. So this gets complicated because there's a lot of villains that I wanted to put down here, and a tragedy is usually a character who's like fundamentally good but has a like super major character flaw or a big mistake that they do, which undoes them, and the end is usually like, well, tragic and ironic and makes you feel bad for them. The most obvious is Orpheus, right?
Orpheus.
If you need oh man, I still feel bad about that. It's just like, what a bummer. We lost such great music. Oh man. So I read a lot here. Accord, I think, is a very good example, because it is a consequence of his own actions, right?
Is there a requirement for them to acknowledge their inherent, like their flaw that has is it still a tragedy if they don't have that epiphany at the end?
I think it would be. I think it wouldn't be like a classical tragedy, I don't think. But like, I think it would fall into the category, I think. I've also have a bunch here that like barely match up. Like Blasto. Yeah. I don't think it's not his character flaw that made him be undone.
But he does accept
it's just like a mistake.
In his moments. Even though he doesn't actually.
The part that makes me think that it lines up is that we feel bad about him, and also that it's the loss of a fundamentally good character, which I don't know if he actually is fundamentally good, but he is at the very end there. So, yeah. I also have Brian, because the end does not actually have to be death. His major character flaw is just not ever being okay with any sort of weakness. I don't know. I think just repeatedly that kind of comes up and ends up making him stay broken. Yeah. So it might apply there. I wrote Sophia. It is kind of like a just desserts sort of thing, because she's a bad person.
But she does sort of like, she gets stuck in her own, categorization.
Yeah. Amy, definitely.
Yeah, definitely Amy.
Major character flaw, which is kind of the inability to deal with any sort of guilt. And she does have an unfortunate end, which is tied with Victoria's end. It makes you feel bad for both of them, mostly for Victoria, but still. And it is the fall of a fundamentally good character. Yeah. I mean, she did, in a sense anyway. I also wrote Jack Slash, just because his end is pretty ironic, that it's his own person. It's Grey Boy that gets him.
Yeah.
Also, it's such fucking bullshit that, it's just, sorry, I need to get this out. It's also bullshit because his ending is, it's great. He's the true bad guy. He's hurt so many people, and he gets to be tortured forever, just like so many others. But he can turn off pain. Like he feels at least 1 second of pain every cycle, right? Out of like, maybe it's a 3-second cycle. But that's like so much better than every other victim gets.
It's so unjust.
Yeah. So, you were about to say before I screamed.
Oh, what was I going to say? Well, I don't know. Like, I feel like he doesn't. I mean, he does. It's his fault because of his own like hubris, right? That he thinks he can pull this off. But I don't know. I guess he fits into it.
And so now for a couple of next ones, I kind of just want to go through them real quick. So Hokewolf, his whole emphasis on strength is also his undoing, basically. And he ends up being, I mean, this is where the fundamentally good character kind of falls away. The next one, Crawler, also hubris, right?
Perfect example.
Yeah, that's a good one though. Trickster, and Noelle for the, basically, neither of them are able to get over their problems, and they're lost. Alexandria, almost a fundamentally good character, but unable to get over her insistence on doing things in a shitty way. Bakuda, sort of, just because she teamed up with Lung that ended up getting her. I guess she explodes herself, unfortunately, but yeah.
I feel like so many of these are like pride. Yeah, they think they can do whatever it is, and it just does not work.
Yes, they too much. I also wrote Skidmark. I don't know. He gets blended. It's pretty
horrible.
It's a lot. It's literally the fall of a character, right? So, Marquis is one of the final ones I put down here. His mistake is caring for his daughter. Although going to the birdcage, as falls go, it's not that bad.
True.
So in the end, I was pretty rough with lining them up here for tragedy, but
it's fine.
Whatever. Yeah. If you guys have any other good matches, let me know. And the very last one is Rebirth. So this is where a character faces usually a single big event that changes them in the aftermath, and they become usually a better person afterwards. And so I think we have a couple of good matchups here. Bonesaw, I think she is now reflecting, becoming a better individual. She's turning into Riley rather than Bonesaw.
Now that she's had the time away from all those influences.
Yeah. Rachel is also obviously undergoing a rebirth. I think it's not a single event, but just generally meeting Taylor and moving on after that. Defiant is another one. I think
absolutely.
Getting almost murdered by Mannequin is actually that main event. And then afterwards being with Dragon. Clockblocker, I think, is sort of matches up with this, but not necessarily in a strictly positive sense. He's become a lot more serious over time and over the many events that happen at Brockton Bay. But he's definitely changing and becoming a different version of himself. And the last one I put down is Regent, which the event that it would be kind of like meeting the Undersiders and then meeting Imp.
I
think
like
is the things that end up
very
changing
specific
him.
to Imp. I feel like he does. I mean, we don't really get to see his perspective by himself, I think, in that moment, after Imp shows up. But there's definitely a change in the way that he conducts himself, I guess, or the way that he occupies space and the conversation in the Undersiders. He has, I feel like he has more confidence in himself. Before, it felt much more like he was just kind of there for, he wasn't really committed. He was there for fun. I guess.
I definitely. I think after you pointed that out, I definitely can see that there's a big difference between his involvement in the group during the Behemoth fight and his involvement in the group in every fight before then. Where, in his interlude, right, he talks about how he knows that he's a background character, right? In the Behemoth fight, I think he's a secondary character. He's not, he's not one of the main ones,
but
but he's
much
still
more involved.
He's very involved. Yeah. That's a great reflection of that, I think. So thanks for pointing that out. So that is the 7 main plots. Let me just go through them real quick again, just to name them. They are Overcoming the Monster, Rags to Riches, The Quest, Voyage and Return, Comedy, Tragedy, and Rebirth. So if you have any disagreements of where they can be placed, also stories can be multiple things at the same time. I named Taylor 3 times.
Yeah.
So
it's all about how you want to read a story, which is basically what we've been doing this whole time, picking out different things.
That's right.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah. So if you have any other characters you want to match up to these, please do. I think it's kind of fun.
It is.
Okay. That's my essay. Final section.
Very nice.
Before we get into our outro. What are your favorite powers from this section, Clarence?
Okay, so I had 2 of them. The first one was the young bands, accumulated power.
Sure.
Where the sort of even distribution of everything, and when they take little pieces. I just really liked their the way that they operated together. I mean, the whole cult thing and all of that, and this isolation, that that's a no-go. But the way that they functioned, I think, in terms of power distribution, very fascinating to me. It's very interesting. But I also really like the Borg. So I like this whole collective entity sort of thing. Yeah. And then my second one, I didn't fully understand Grey Boy before this. And it's terrifying to me what he can do.
He's pretty
and just
pretty bad.
the phrase the perpetuity of horror is just so much. But it's really interesting. Like, it's cool.
Yeah.
Additionally, I really like that his power is basically the verb conjugations of his name. I really like, that's funny to me. And
to get Grey Boyd.
Yes. I mean, it's, terrible concept, but like, just in terms of like grammatical functioning, I like that.
I wonder what they do with all the victims, like the ones, especially before this section, where they actually had time to do stuff. Like, like, there's not much you can do about all the injuries, right? But I feel like you could, like, at least, like, stick a television in front of them and just set it to whatever channel they want. I feel like that would be better than nothing.
Yeah, I mean, but, like, is there any way to stop it at all?
I don't think so.
Or, like, if he dies, does everything that he's done stop?
They didn't. No. I mean, I guess it's not revealed, but, like, no.
Inescapable.
They go until, well, actually, he's already died before. That was the thing,
Oh, yeah,
right?
that's true.
Yeah. So that was revealed, yes.
Yeah, horrible.
Yeah, it kind of sucks.
Yeah.
And it's such a childish damage, too. Like, I think, actually, it would be interesting to analyze his sort of horror. Like, he's perpetually a child, and his, like, maliciousness, the, like, uncaring amount, he's inflicting an eternity of pain, and he's just, like...
Yeah.
He doesn't really care.
It's just very much like, it feels like, maybe it's just because we've been talking about all of these, like, the hero's journey and epics and everything, but it just feels very much like the god's punishment of, like, a wayward mortal, Or, like, that one that always, like, wants to eat but can't eat, whose name starts with...
Tantalus?
Yes, yeah. And then the one that, like, is always rolling the boulder, all of this, or, like...
Yeah.
The other one that, like, has his innards eaten. Like, it just, like, the repetition of it feels very much like
That's
like
a good point.
Greek god acting out in anger.
And it's something, those punishments are always, like, way too much, right? They
horrific. And totally not equal to the crime. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, turning someone into an animal for, like, looking at you. That kind of thing,
I mean, to be fair, I feel like
dark.
there is this sort of, like, maliciousness that exists in like, immaturity or, like, I don't know, that, like, because you don't know of the world, you don't know the consequences of what you're doing, sort of thing.
Yeah, because you're not involved in the world in the same way. It just struck me, I've actually, like, not read any stories that were not, like, intentionally, like, dark, that have had that sort of callous divine punishment. Like, any story I've read with, like, gods as, like, characters and stuff have never been, like, nearly as horrible as the Greek gods were.
Yeah.
Which is weird, I think, because, like, the Greek myths were already written, so we've, like, gone less intense than that usually.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, I'm going off on a tangent now, but the Greek gods, like, it's interesting because, like, they are, like, fallible, sometimes stupid, like, characters, right? Like, their personalities are human beings,
they're
just, like,
very
maybe exaggerated a bit more.
Human.
Yeah, but, like, they are also, like, divine, like, sublime power, where, like, you cannot look at them, or else your eyes will burn out and you will be consumed, right? Incinerated.
Which is the worst
or otherwise
combination,
destroyed.
I think.
Yeah.
Is that beings that act like humans but
are not
the powers, like powers that are so far beyond what we can imagine or process. It's just I don't know. It's like, I feel like that's what, like, makes the Greek gods worse than, like, the Titans before them, like, because there's a level of like pettiness, I guess. Yeah. But, like, pettiness attached to like supernatural cruelty and unpredictability. Yeah.
Okay, I'm continuing to go off on the tangent in my mind, but we will move on. So I had two favorite powers in mind.
Oh, yes, do tell.
And the first, just real quick, the meteorite guy.
Ah, yes.
Pretty cool.
Does he have a name?
Where he,
do we know
like,
his
teleports name? A house. No, but he's part of the Thanda. That's all I know. Or maybe you do know. I don't remember. But that's neat. I wonder what like that power is supposed to be. Like, is his power literally just to teleport gigantic bits of mass into the sky, or is it like just a very big teleportation sort of thing? Yeah. And he just like uses it in that way. Because it's a lot. He destroys 8 Siberians.
Yeah, it's pretty intense.
Boom. Yeah, good job. The other one is Chevalier. For both aspects of his power, I think just the like idea of punching with the weight of a 50-ton mountain of metal is just super satisfying, I think. And then the glimmers obviously are really just fascinating.
So interesting. I read this webcomic about mental illness and things that people carry. And this one character can, like, the main character can see all of these things that people carry around with them as like demons, or like little things that like sit on their shoulder or like that, and he knows what they all are. But no one else can see them. But it's really interesting because it totally changes the landscape of all of his interactions. Because like we're there when he's on the bus and, you know, going around. He's like at a college, so he sees all of this like jealousy and anger and anxiety and all of this, and it's all like very visible to him, which is what I imagined with Chevalier. But it's interesting when things are so what was the term that you used when we were talking about pale, about like literal things becoming literal, like metaphorical things become like literalized.
Literalizing?
Yeah,
I guess?
that sort of thing. Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, I definitely see that reflection, and that sounds really cool. And also, you need to read Pale.
It's on my
list. You really need to read Pale. Okay.
Listen. After I finish, I mean, I've got 2 weeks, right? I have to just once I finish reading Worm, then I'm going to sit down and like read all of the available Pale.
Yes. Okay, that's our favorite powers. Last thing we're going to have is our themes and theories. We have one this week. PETA Enigma, like 2 days before we recorded this, in a really amusing post. They wrote it in a really like entertaining way. In the overview thread from 2 weeks ago. Yes, it was fun to read, yes. He talked about distant reading, which is his least favorite literary theory. And he's talked about it before, which is basically taking the opportunity to graph like facts about characters and chart them, and through doing that you can find some facts. So like one that is used especially as an example is charting all the characters' connections, and the one with that reduces the distance between characters the most is the protagonist. At least that's the theory. So via doing that, you find out that Captain America is the protagonist of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and not anyone else, because he has the most connections to the most characters.
Is it not Iron Man?
Apparently not. Yeah. So PETA is trying to apply this to Arc 26 because it's unclear of who's the protagonist here, saying namely the only person who believes Taylor is the protagonist of it is Taylor. And like Jack's nemesis, Jack's antagonist is Theodore. So he wanted to find out who is the main character in Arc 26, who's the protagonist. Theo does the last fight. And he makes the joke that Coil Sniper, who joined the PRT, ends up taking Jack down. So obviously he's the protagonist. But who's more important? Who's the real protagonist? And more humorous phrasing. So there's a few ways to analyze this. He proposes who contributes more to the overall fight, who takes down the most Slaughterhouse 9. If we count each cape taken down and give extra points for like the bigger ones, maybe the winner, the protagonist, is whoever does the most of that. Or, you know, it could be whoever like leads the most people or is in the most pivotal moments, in the most fights, whatever.
Yeah.
If it was distant reading style of who meets how the most characters, it would probably be Dragon, because she's talking to everyone, even if it's not on screen.
Yeah, she's very connected. Which I suppose if she was going to, you know, kind of initiate an apocalypse, the fact that she has been talking to everyone and is monitoring everyone, like, makes it very easy for her to, like, initiate that very quickly.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
Yes. No, it's good.
Yes.
So PETA proposes that there's some methods would be to take a combination, not to do just who met whom, and not just who killed whom, but also who fought against whom, and that the protagonist probably participated in most of the plot. I think it's interesting to consider how much of it is on screen versus off screen, and how much of it is like in world. Who's the protagonist, right?
Yeah, because
when you consider everything that's not happening on screen,
that we are presented with is very different, I think, than what is like happening in actuality. If that makes sense, of like, we are very limited in our scope, I think, because we're watching through Taylor's eyes. And I feel like it would be very different if we sat the whole way through, like with Theo, or if we were with Defiant the whole time, or I mean, even if we were with like Bonesaw the whole time. Like, I feel like it would be very different if we were thinking about whose perspective we are like set up with, I guess, because there's so many aspects of the plot that we don't see happening because we're in this more like limited scope. And even when we get into Theo's head at the very end, there's still like huge amounts of things that are happening around him that we don't really get a...
Yeah, he's facing off against Jack, but there's plenty of other fights. There's the 8 Harbingers fighting against some heroes.
Yeah, so, I don't know. It's difficult to say when there's so many people doing so many different things.
Yeah.
But,
so if you have any ideas on how you might want to apply a distant reading to the section of Worm, go ahead and do that, and then let us know how it goes. We would love to hear that. Or if you have any other themes and theories you want us to look at on our next perspective episodes for, I mean, this section is the last section of Worm, so it's kind of like for all of Worm. So
all
if you've been
thinking.
Holding back...
Yes, tell us all the things that you've been thinking. You've been contemplating, perhaps something that has like emerged from our, the loose threads that we leave at the end of some of our essay explorations.
Yeah, if you have been holding back because you couldn't talk about it without spoilers, this is the time. Obviously, don't spoil War. I mean, you can put Ward stuff in spoilers if you want, but all of Worm, starting in 2 weeks, our next overview episode, will be available for you guys to talk about. So
I'm so excited.
Yeah, if you have any little theories, we would love to hear them.
Yes.
Okay, that's our show. So let's cover a couple of things before we sign off. So what's happening in Doof Media? I have 2 things to mention here. So one, the Fantasia. Am I saying that correctly? Yeah. Fantasia. I don't know why I suddenly forgot how that's said. The film festival is starting this week, which is North America's largest genre film festival. So that's fantasy and sci-fi, basically everything that critics turn their nose up at. So for 2020, they've gone totally online because plague. And unfortunately, it is region locked to Canada. So they're basically like streaming all these movies at set times on a site. However, Doof Media's Scott Daly will be attending and viewing as many of the films as possible because we got a press pass. Doof Media is an official critic website now, and so he's going to be posting reviews and stuff on our site. We have a whole tab dedicated to it. I'm very excited to read his stuff and see what's coming up in films. And now Scott can finally start calling himself a real critic and ignore that ever-increasing sense of imposter syndrome. Please help him. Call him a critic. Anytime you talk about him, say Scott Daly, film critic, comic film critic. I think that would go a long way. And I would certainly appreciate y'all doing that. The other thing is that yesterday the Decomposing Worm / Pale Reflections fan art contest ended. So thank you to everyone who sent in work. That's awesome. I haven't looked at it yet, but I'm very excited to do so.
Hurrah!
So, unfortunately, there is not more time to send in work. However, the voting for the fan art contest will begin, I think, over this weekend. I think it's probably early next week is when that'll open. So, voting is patron only. You would have to go to patreon.com to see the poll, see all the work, and vote for your favorites. There's so much. I know there's so much great talent in our community, so I'm really excited to see what y'all came up with. The theme was monsters. I can't wait to see what monsters you guys created.
It's such an open definition of something. Monsters. Yeah.
Yes.
Very exciting. Well, if you like what we do here at Doof Media, you should consider donating a bit for like each month, or whatever you can afford. So there's a lot of like cool like extra content that you can reach in this particular capacity. Specifically, I hear Matias has would you call that like a bonus episode?
Yeah, so basically, I mentioned it a couple times, the bonus content is basically short, sometimes experimental, sometimes just like different exclusive content only available at the $10 level and above. So I know that Freeman Bros has been one where Matt Freeman talks to his brother about a bunch of sciencey things, and it's very high level and philosophical. And recently, Jarvis and I recorded an episode talking about Madoka Magica, or Puella Magi Madoka Magica, and why it's a great anime, why everyone should watch it. So I have not released that one yet. I apologize. I meant to earlier this week, but it's recorded. It's basically done editing. I just have a little bit more to do, and then it will be up there. So, and there's going to be, we're planning to have 2 more episodes of that over the next 2 months. So
if you want to gain access to it, $10 level, very exciting.
Mm-hmm. For those who don't know, the Doofcast covered Puella Magi Madoka Magica like back in January or something, and they didn't like it.
Oh, and so you're
but Jarvis and I do, so we are redeeming it. Yes, that I don't want to call it a show because that is so much commitment to actually be like, this is a show. But that segment, that bonus content, we're calling it Doofovers.
Doofovers.
Because we're redoofing it.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Sort of.
I like it.
Anyway.
Yes. Anyway, so also additionally, in a slightly different side note, you should also consider donating to Wildbow's Patreon. Because Wildbow has created this realm for us to exist in, and we should appreciate that. Also, he like relies on this income to like make living in, and we should support artists. Mm-hmm. And this is an opportunity for us to do so.
Yeah. Yes. I want... Wildbow's stuff is so cool. Speaking of, actually, real quick plug, on Do the Right Thing, he submitted a couple stories over the past couple weeks.
Cool.
So there's no like a master thread of that or anything, but if you're interested in seeing little short stories, little concepts that Wildbow is just real quick cooked up, some of them are utterly... I was about to say some of them, but they're all fascinating. They're wonderful in totally different ways too. So check those out. And also check out all the other incredible stories that our community makes. There's actually so much really, really, really good content every single week. And I'm continuously impressed by the work that our community creates. It's awesome. Yeah. So if you liked what we did here this week, another way you can support us is by leaving a rating review on whatever way that you get podcasts, or spreading the word, telling people that there's a analysis podcast teaching literary analysis off of the internet hit web serial, superhero web serial Worm. So just, read Worm real quick and then you go listen to this podcast. Just your average recommendation. If you want to let us know how we did this week and other weeks, and any other thoughts or comments you guys might have off of what we said, you can email us. You can email us at decomposingpodcast@gmail.com, or comment in our discussion threads that are posted every week or every time an episode comes out. Or you can follow us on Twitter, which is where you'll find out when an episode is inevitably a day late, which is at DecomposingPod.
At least we're consistent. We're like consistently inconsistent,
Yes. I think we were on time like, 2 weeks ago?
I feel like we were.
Once, and then we were not on time for like many weeks.
Alas.
Yeah. See, I don't want to just change it like episodes come out on Saturdays because then inevitably episodes will start coming out on Sundays.
Yeah.
Okay. That's all we have for y'all this week. Don't forget, we're now bi-weekly, so next episode is coming out September 4th, and we're going to be covering the end of Worm, arcs 27 Extinction through the Epilogues, Teneral.
The end is nigh.